us all the way from the UK. We appreciate you coming. We know it's late there. Usually we meet on a Wednesday, but it would be really, really late if you met with us when we usually meet. So rather than have you come in the middle of the night, we thought it'd be much better to do this on a Saturday. And I know we're all really, really looking forward to hearing your presentation. I looked at your website. Maybe you can tell us about some of the awards that you've won. I saw many, many awards. Some of them are publications that I wouldn't recognize because they're European, but we'd love to hear about it and about your work, and looking forward to this presentation. So Matthew, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Right, hello everyone, I'm Matt Emmet. I live in the south of the UK in a place called Reading, which is about sort of equidistant, really, south of Oxford and west of London. I've been into photography since I was 19 years old. I'm now 50. Bear with me, it's not advancing a slide. So I'm just very quickly, before I go on to the main topic, I'm just going to talk about my photographic journey from back when I was 19 years old. Just after my 19th birthday, I was on the verge of going traveling, and I was about to go to places like Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Laos, Burma, Vietnam, Cambodia, all places in Southeast Asia. And my father thought it would be a really good idea. He was into photography at the time, and he was using a brand. This was back in the 1980s. He was using a brand that was huge back in the 1980s. It was the brand back then. So he went out and he bought me the same camera that he was using, which was a Pentax ME Super. And he took me out a few times and showed me all about how the interrelationship between exposure and aperture, and not ISO at the time, I think it was ASA at the time, but the interrelationship, the exposure triangle, and taught me a lot of the basics. And then off I went traveling, and really going to somewhere like Southeast Asia was probably one of the best places I could have gone to really learn about photography. This is a picture, obviously not taken by me, this one. This is a picture of me taken on slide film. I took about, I was buying them in major cities while I was out there, but I was using a roll of slide film called Fujichrome Velvia, which is a reasonably good quality slide film. And I think I came home from that. It was supposed to be a year-long trip, but I ran out of money a bit sooner than expected, and I was out there for 8 months in total. And I came back, I think it was 86 rolls of Fujichrome Velvia to develop when I got home. And I developed them around about 5 rolls at a time, just because of the amount of money it was going to cost. So once I developed them all, there were around 2,000 odd pictures there. And just out of all of the different pictures, there were a real mixed bag, to be fair, because considering it was my first go. But actually, out of those 2,000, there was maybe 150, 200 pictures that I was really, really pleased with. And I thought, wow, maybe this is something that I've got a little bit of natural ability for. So I thought I'd stick with it. So just what we're looking at here is some of those better shots from that trip. So there's pictures here from India, which is top left, which is bottom left. We have me and my traveling companion on the Mekong River in Laos. Novice monks in Sukhothai in Thailand, baby on the deck of a boat in Mandalay in Burma, girl in the blue city of Jodhpur, and then bottom right we have children in a back street in Jaipur in India. And then the final selection, probably my favourite shot from my travels, which top left, which is a boy taking a shortcut in the desert city of Jaisalmer in very close to the Pakistan border in India. Children playing on the banks of the Irrawaddy River in Burma. Below that, more novice monks. The bottom central is Cambodia, and then the red robes, the very young monks, is in Burma. And then girls silhouetted against the sunset on the island of Koh Samui in Thailand. And then finally, this last shot, some of you may have been here. This is in Cambodia. This is Angkor Wat. And all around Angkor Wat, in the jungle around the main temple here, which has been fully restored, are lots of other temples that are just covered in the rainforest. And some of those temples have been left how they were found in nature. And I didn't realize it. This is all the way back in 1986 or 7, I think. But I was taking pictures of ruined structures for the first time, really. And I didn't realize that all those years later, this was basically what I was going to be shooting full time. So anyway, I came back from traveling and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a travel photographer and I'm going to work for people like Rough Guide or Lonely Planet. And that was the plan. And I did a few more trips to other places around different countries around the world. And then I met somebody and we settled down, and then we had children, and that kind of put a stop to all the traveling. And really all I took pictures of for the next possibly 6, 7, 8 years was literally just focusing on taking pictures of my children as they were growing up. Totally valid reason to use the camera. I'm not putting it down at all, but the focus had really changed from what I was intending to do with my photographic time. We were just too busy, really. And then suddenly in 2011, a friend bought his first DSLR, and he said to me, "You've been into photography for a while. Maybe you could help me out with some lessons." And just like my dad had done for me all those years beforehand, I said, "Sure, that's not a problem. I can." So I went to his house, and we ended up in his back garden, and we took pictures of rose bushes and plants. And after the first lesson, I said, "Was that useful?" He said, "Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'll probably learn more if we go somewhere specific, somewhere which with something more interesting to photograph. I think I'll probably pick it up quicker that way. So if you don't mind, we can do another lesson if you're up for it." And I said, "Sure, that's not a problem." So a few months passed, and then he reminded me that I was happy to do it again. And he said, "I found this industrial complex about half an hour's drive south of Reading, which is in a place called Fleet in Hampshire." And I said, "Yeah, what is it?" And he said, "It's a massive industrial complex where they used to test jet engines." And I said, "Right, that sounds interesting." He said, "Yeah, no, it looks amazing from the pictures I've seen." I said, "You allowed to go there?" And he said, "Technically not, no." I said, "Right, well, so what? How do you get in?" He said, "We have to climb over the fences and then just try and keep out the way of the security that drive around the site." And I said, "Well, Mark, I'm really not sure I want to do this. I don't really want to get arrested and end up in a prison cell somewhere." He said, "Oh, nothing's going to happen. Don't worry about it." And I said, "Well, seriously, Mark, I don't know." He said, "I'll tell you what, you look at the pictures online. I'll tell you what the site's called. You look at the pictures online and then tell me if you want to do it or not." And having grown up addicted to films like Ridley Scott's Alien and Blade Runner and things like that, science fiction films I was absolutely addicted to, the site itself looked like you'd walked onto an alien spacecraft, and I just had to do it. So I found myself about 6 o'clock one morning at that fence line I've just shown you, with my heart almost bursting out of my chest, thumping in my chest. And we climbed over the fence and made our way up through the trees into a place that was known as Pystock, or the National Gas Turbine Establishment. From 1951 to 2001, it tested all of the UK's military fighter jet engines and a few other gas turbine engines for things like ships, and also the Concorde project, which was the only civilian project that was tested there. So just a few pictures from the site now. This is obviously a Google Maps screenshot of the site. The actual fence line that we were stood at is here. So this was the very first location I ever did. And if I hadn't done this site as the first location, I may not be doing it now. When we got into the site, so this is it when it was in use. You can see it's the size of a small town. It's a very big site. When it was in use, it was absolutely top secret. They were working on military projects for the UK government, and you had to sign the Official Secrets Act to work here. Our first trip was in 2012, so it was a good 11 years after the site had closed. This is a picture of the site as it was being demolished in 2013. My trips were all in 2012. I did 11 trips and spent about 88 hours on site. And I almost, in those 88 hours, I almost got inside every building, but not quite, almost. And then once again, oh no, that's not that slide. So just a few shots now from inside the site. What we're looking at here is a large jet engine test cell. This was cell 4, and this was the only test cell on site that wasn't built for military purposes. This was built in 1963 to test the Olympus engines of Concorde, which you're probably aware is the passenger plane that flew the Atlantic from places like France and the UK across to, I think it flew to New York, but it did it in record time, faster than any other plane could do. So this is the location its engines were developed. This is cell 4 again, looking across from one of the air intakes in the outer wall of the building. And when this cell was in use, there's a rolling crane that would roll the whole length of the hall, and a section of pipe would be lowered that would connect this outer wall hole to the entrance to the testing chamber on the other side there. On the left, we have pressure bulkhead and jet nozzle in the centre in cell 3, which is fairly close by to cell 4. It's a much smaller test cell that was located in a tunnel underground. And this was basically a test cell that much smaller military aircraft engines were tested at. So, for example, a few of the planes that were tested in cell 3 were planes like the Tornado, Harrier jump jet. The last plane that was tested in this test cell was the Typhoon or the Eurofighter, and then as well as a few other helicopters and airplanes as well over the years. On the left, we're looking back at cell 4, the Concorde test cell from the crane carriage. In the centre, we've got a pressure gauge, an oil relay pressure loss, which was found in the turbine hall. And on the right, we have a control panel that was in the one building on site that was designed for the testing of naval gas turbines, so ship engines. And this was the control panel. And just beyond this was a larger, huge water tank, basically, which the ship engines were lowered into. And then they would run them, they would do endurance testing on the engines. They would run them at full pelt for a month at a time to see if they could break the engines. This is the turbine hall. So this is where the air pressure on site was generated. The air was sucked in on the left side of the building and it was blown out the right-hand side. And if you can remember those maps at the beginning, you could see all of those pipes snaked around the site. And the air that was generated in this turbine hall, down the right-hand side, we've got a row of 8 motors. Then we've got next to it the larger red thing, which is a turbine. We've got 8 turbines, and then next to them we've got 24 compressors. And it was it was all of those things, but it was the compressors that helped generate the suction and that was able to provide the correct wind speeds in the test cells. So the fastest test cell was the Concorde test cell, and they could actually generate wind speeds inside the test cell of over Mach 2, so about 1,500 miles an hour. This is a control handle that was last set to condensate temperature, and that was in the air house or the turbine hall that you just saw. This is cell 1, the earliest of the test cells on site. So from about 1952 onwards, they were running engine tests. And the person that was responsible for Britain's very early jet engine prototypes is a guy called Frank Whittle. And Frank Whittle was running a company called Power Jets in Leicester in the UK. And the British government, who didn't really see a huge amount of value in the jet engine at the time, they were investing a little bit of money in his company bit by bit. But he wasn't getting the investment he needed, and basically what happened was the Luftwaffe, the Germans at the end of Second World War, they actually got their own jet aircraft into the air, and all of a sudden the British government suddenly saw the value in it, and they decided that they were going to take Frank Whittle's project off of him. They actually nationalised the project, and he lost his baby effectively, and he had a series of nervous breakdowns over the fact that he'd lost his prototype to the government. But the Pystock is the site that was developed off the back of Frank Whittle's early prototypes. This is a fairly small test cell. I could walk down this and run my hand along that rail on the ceiling. It's about 30 to 40 feet long in total. This is what I always assumed. I saw a few of these around the site when I was visiting it. Looked like bullet holes in windows. And after I do a lot of posting on social media, and obviously after a while your audience starts to grow, and quite a lot of people are seeing the posts, and eventually people that had worked at the site started seeing my post and saying, yes, indeed, that will be a bullet hole, because actually at night the people who are owning the site at the moment, they lease the site out for the training of special forces and military personnel. So there's a lot of military training that goes on there at night. So undoubtedly some of these things damage I saw around the site was military caused. And then finally, the last shot I took in 2012, I'd done a lot of trips there, 11 trips in total. And the site had really got under my skin, and it was somewhere that I'd done a lot of research on. I'd basically fallen in love with an industrial site, which is an odd thing to say, but it's pretty true. And I promised myself I wasn't going to go back after that final trip, because there were demolition signs all over the fence line. And I really didn't want to see the site being pulled to pieces. That was it. I said my goodbyes as I took this picture and I left, and I didn't go back. This is the site in 2013. You can see it's pretty much all gone. Apart from 2 buildings in the very far north, there's a Vector Aerospace, which was always there, but it was a third party. It wasn't anything to do with the rest of the site. And then there's this building here at the very top centre, which was there, and we tried to enter that building in 2012. But when we got close to the building, we noticed there were a row of parked cars outside the building that looked like they'd been parked there that day. So we didn't enter that building, and we found out after doing a bit of research that actually that was the one building on site that was still in use. But in 2015, somebody contacted me and said, did you realise that the anechoic chamber is now accessible? They've stopped using it. So we rushed back to the site and made our way into that final piece of the jigsaw. So this is, when it was in use, this was Europe's largest anechoic chamber. If you're not familiar with anechoic chambers, they are noise testing environments. So what we're looking at here, I think probably this little bit of silver poking out from this blue pylon probably is the remnants of a jet engine. This is the engine mounting pylon here. And all over the walls, you've got these very large foam wedges, wedge-shaped things. So they're basically made of foam. And they basically cancel out any reflected noise. So you get a very pure sound in the cell, in the building. So you've got the engine under test here, and you've got these metal towers, and you can see these little metallic boom arms on the towers here. And they would have had a microphone mounted on them. And they basically, in a semicircle around the jet engine, they would measure the sound envelope coming off the jet engine. And then they could make adjustments to the engine to try and make the engines, for example, quieter. So just a few more shots from inside the anechoic chamber. On the left, we have some of the extractor fans at the very far end of the building. Once the engine under test had blown through that great big exhaust collector on the far side of the main chamber, it went through a series of turns designed to dampen the noise from the engines before the air was ejected and blown straight up out the building through these fans. And then a close-up on the right showing a close-up of some of the noise cancelling wedges on the walls. And then just before you reach the extractor fans, we have a series of turns where the air from the jet engine was taken through, I think these were known as low frequency and high frequency splitters, and they were designed to dampen the noise from the jet engines before it was ejected from the building. Finally, on the left, we have a shot looking back through the exhaust collector into the anechoic chamber. And on the right, that is genuine elation there. That is me standing finally in that one location I'd wanted to stand 3 years beforehand, and finally got to do it, completing the jigsaw, as it were. So that was it. That was the location that started me off. And to be fair, I probably wouldn't be doing it now had I not done that location first of all, but it got me hooked. And after doing that, like, even the first time, I just thought, this is what I want to do from now on. This is what I'm going to photograph. So in a nutshell, what is it? You've probably had Matthew Christopher talk to you before, so you probably know the term urbex. It's an amalgamation of 2 words, urban exploration. In a nutshell, it's to locate, access and shoot abandoned structures. For me, and I think if you're the sort of person that finds things, you have a fascination or interest in things in general, particularly things like science, history, you will go to these locations, you will do a bit of research before you go, and you'll come back, and if the location impresses you, then you'll come back and you'll read until you know a lot about the location. So it kind of teaches you a lot as well. And the next point to note, it does generate imagery that has not been overshot. Most people are not prepared to climb a fence that warns you of potential prosecution. So I think if you're trying to build a name for yourself and you're trying to build a reputation in photography, then it's got that benefit. You are definitely doing something that fewer people in the population are going to be doing. Scope-wise, there's a whole world of abandoned places out there, and I think these days, with the way that the world economy is, places are becoming abandoned all the time in all countries around the world. So there's always a fresh. That's obviously not great from a societal point of view, but from the point of view of a photographer, then it's a good thing for us in a way. It does exist in a bit of a grey area between civil and criminal laws. Now, I know that in the US, the laws definitely differ from here in the UK. In the UK, if we're in a private location that we shouldn't, somewhere we shouldn't be, we have not committed a criminal offence. I think that is the case in the US. We have committed a civil offence, but provided if you're caught somewhere and you're asked to leave, as long as you do leave, then I think you're fine. I know a lot of people in this community in the UK that do this as a hobby, and people are regularly caught in locations, and as long as you politely leave, you leave when you're asked to, you haven't picked anything up. At the moment you pick something up and put it in your bag, then it's no longer a civil trespass, it becomes burglary. And if you smash a window or kick a door in to gain access to a building, that's aggravated trespass, and that is a criminal offence. So as long as you don't cross certain lines, then you remain on the right side of criminal law. If you don't, then a criminal record is possible. So locations wise, one of the reasons I love it is just because it gets you off your bum and out of the house and into the world, and experiencing places and things. So just as an example, power stations, I think over the years I've done 3 or 4 power stations, 2 steel plants, 3 blast furnaces, several schools, 2 universities, lots of hospitals, etc., etc. You get the idea. It really does get you out there and just experiencing things in general. And some of the locations I've seen over the years, I'm not that prolific a photographer really compared to some of the people I know, but I think I've shot over the last 10 years, I think I've shot about 240, 250 locations over the years. I know people in the UK and in Europe as well who don't have a family like me, and they're out all the time doing it. And I know people that have shot thousands of locations. For me, it is just an alternative form of sightseeing. It's a slightly riskier form of sightseeing. But I think if you're going to travel to one of the maybe one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, you're going to go to, I don't know, Machu Picchu in Peru, or you're going to go to the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, and you're going to see these really popular heritage sites around the world, and you want to get a shot of something without people in it, for example, you're going to be waiting a long time, and you're going to have to do some clever Photoshop trickery to remove the people. If you're prepared to go into places like this, then there will be, pretty much can guarantee there will be nobody else there. And when we go traveling in Europe, which we used to do twice a year, we often shoot from the moment it gets light until it gets dark, and sometimes even after dark with lights. So if you're into photography, it's absolutely fantastic from that point of view, because it is shooting all day long, non-stop, and sometimes days at a time. We often go away for about 5 days. So how do you get into it? If you were interested in getting into urbex as a hobby, how would you do that? So obviously the main way of gaining information, I would like to say, is an area that I've always used and have gained most of my information through research, but I would be lying if I said that was true. This is a little bit of research I was doing. I was gradually building a map of an underground area below the county of Wiltshire in the UK. This is below a town called Corsham, and it's an underground stone quarry that was requisitioned during the Second World War by the British government. They were having factories all over the UK were being bombed by German bombers, and a lot of the stuff being produced for the war effort was being destroyed in bombing raids. So they requisitioned a large part, the coloured area effectively, they requisitioned a large area of the underground areas and turned it into a war factory, a war production factory during the Second World War. After the Second World War, this whole area was then requisitioned again and turned into a relocation shelter, just in case the Russians attacked with atomic weapons. So the British government could relocate here. And it was an area I became obsessed with. I was so desperate to get inside. And over the years, I have got into parts of it, but this area with the coloured outline is an area that I never made it into. I've been just to the south of it, just to the northwest of it, but never into that area. I would still like to, but it's very difficult to get into these days. So research is an area that you can look into. But to be fair, most of my locations have come about through asking other photographers. I'm a member of several online forums, and I've got to know people over the years. And if I see photos from somewhere that looks really impressive, I will just say to one of my contacts in the community, wow, do you mind telling me where that is? And if people know who you are, and they know that you're not a graffiti artist, or they know that you're not somebody who's going to go in and strip the place of copper wiring and things like that, then most people are happy to share. But you do kind of need to prove yourself first. So just a few shots now from that underground area that I've just talked about. These are just a few of my trips into the underground areas. The first few trips I was doing, I was trying to access those underground areas from some of the publicly accessible areas. So what we're looking at here is a large chamber in an underground stone quarry called Box Freestone Quarry. And it was an area that was dug out by, well, not by the engineer himself, but a team of people working for Brunel, who was a well-known engineer during the 1800s. And when they were digging a railway tunnel under the hill here, they came across loads of good quality stone that was being brought out of the tunnel. So they realized that the stone underground was really good quality stone. And after the tunnel was complete, private enterprise moved in. There were 7 different companies. They were all given an area of land that they could start quarrying down underground. And what you're looking at here is one of the first exploratory holes from one of the companies who dug down from the surface. And I kind of like the shot. It's the same location, just shot from 2 different angles here. And I quite like the one on the right because it kind of shows you how the mine was dug. What you're looking at here, just where my cursor is here, that is an area where initially, after they'd dug down from the surface, this was ground level at one point. You can see that it was ground level because what we're looking at here was a side passage. And you can see that the side passage has been backfilled. All of the stone that was no good to them, they actually backfilled the passage with, and that's known as deads. So all of the dead stone has been backfilled in there. So that was ground level. And then once they'd used up all of the good quality stone on that level, they then bored down again and dug out again, and that was a side passage there. And then eventually you can just see just down there's another square shape there, that's another side passage there. So you get to see how the mines will work downwards from the surface. If you travel far enough through the publicly accessible mines, you reach the boundaries of where the military controlled areas were. It's about a 45-minute walk underground. I wouldn't advise going into any of these kinds of areas without some form of navigation. We basically went underground with squares of paper printed with arrows on them. And every time we reached a junction, and there were lots of junctions underground, the whole place looked very, very similar. Some junctions, there were 3, 4, 5 turn-offs at each junction. And once you get spun around a few times, you would be hopelessly lost. So what we did is we placed arrows at each junction we came to, pointing back towards the last junction. And when it was time to leave, we just followed the arrows, picked up the arrows as we went, and it led us straight back to the entrance. So very quickly on the left, what we're looking at here is one of the grills and razor wire areas where the military used to be encamped. That's historically going back a while in time. The military areas have receded back into the mine considerably further now. And once you're through that grill, you can see there's a hole in the grill there. Once you climb through there, you make your way through another part of the mine, and then you reach an area like this on the right. And I can't walk any closer. You can see there's a sign on the wall there saying MOD, Ministry of Defence, Property, Keep Out, Danger of Death on the wall there. And up above me, there's a little 2 red lights, which is basically infrared light. And then there's a camera on the wall next to it. And if you step any closer than that, a very loud alarm goes off. And somebody in the military base above ground will probably look at a TV screen and check you out. And when we got out from this very first trip, when we found the door, we set the alarm off. And when we got back to the car afterwards, a 4-wheel drive police vehicle drove up to us and said to us, guys, you're more within your rights to go underground, but please do not attempt to go anywhere near those doors underground, which we haven't done. But after lots of begging, we did eventually manage to let the military, after a lot of hassling them, they allowed us into an area to the south of that coloured area on the map, which is known as Spring Quarry. And this was an area that was used for storage of munitions and plane parts and tank parts during the Second World War. And you can see the mine looks very different here. They've actually poured concrete over the ground and they've sanitized it somewhat. And you can see there's storage racks here that were for storage of military parts during the Second World War. There were around 3,000 people working underground during the Second World War. And with that many people working underground, you've got a lot of people breathing in the oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. And all over the place underground are these very large corridor-sized fans. And they were just designed to keep the air circulating underground. And what we're looking at here is the same fan, just shot from 2 different sides. One of the interesting things to note about these fans on this left-hand shot, you've got this sort of circular barn door type thing. And what that meant was they were never used, but they were designed that if the Luftwaffe dropped gas bombs on the surface, they could close those off to protect the workers inside the underground areas from breathing in poison gas. So just a quick section now on some of the equipment I use. When I first started shooting abandoned locations, I was using Canon 400D. But I was also, just before I got into shooting abandoned buildings, I was also doing a lot of caving. I think in the US you called it spelunking. So I was doing a fair bit of caving in South Wales. And I started off trying to do, before I was shooting abandoned buildings, I was trying to do cave photography. And when I was crawling through very narrow passageways, I was carrying the camera behind me in a medical drum inside a leather bag. and it was attached to me by a section of rope. And as I was crawling, the drum would bounce around. And I had although I had the camera protected by t-shirts and jumpers inside the drum, trying to protect it from any shocks, I think my Canon lasted, the first time I started doing cave photography, it lasted about 3 trips before it broke. I then bought another Canon on eBay to replace it, and I think it lasted 2 trips and then broke again. And it was just serendipity, really. It was just good timing. Pentax contacted me around that time. They said they really liked some of my cave photography. Would I be interested in working with them as an ambassador? Like, they would sponsor me and provide me with some camera equipment. So I remembered all those years before my Pentax ME Super and how robust and solid the camera felt. And I thought, well, it's probably a really good camera for what I'm doing. So I agreed to it, and they sent me out the Pentax K3. And just a few pictures now taken with the K3. This is a colonnade, a ruined colonnade in the grounds of a once very large country estate, historic country house on the Isle of Anglesey in North Wales. And the house itself burnt down in the Second World War. There were a load of Polish soldiers billeted in the grounds and also in one of the wings in the house. And this is the story I've read anyway, that the Polish soldiers complained, it was during the winter, they complained that the house was so cold, and could they be moved to warmer premises. The British Army said no, and to try and get themselves moved, they decided to set a small fire in part of the house, which rapidly got out of control and the whole house burnt down. And so basically the house was abandoned from that point onwards. And this is one of the follies in the grounds of the house, one of the many sort of outbuildings and fountains and steps between different levels of lawn. And it's one of those amazing places. I've been to, obviously, to Angkor in Cambodia, and I feel like this is the UK's version of Angkor. Everything in this what once was a very large estate, dotted around here and there. You have to sort of make your way through the undergrowth to find it all. It's an amazing location. So here's an example of me doing a bit of caving. This is me climbing down the sea cliffs in Pembrokeshire in Wales. And this is a cave that I'd wanted to do this years beforehand. I did this actually about 5 years ago. I sort of got back into caving just for the one day to do this one cave. It's a very hard cave to access. A lot of people don't even know where it is, but if you know where to look for it, you have to abseil down the sea cliffs, and the entrance is about halfway down the cliffs. And then you can crawl in under the cliffs along a few passageways, and you end up in that chamber that's bottom right. It's a really nicely decorated cave chamber. So this is Skurian lamps. This is something I use for my photography, but clearly I started off, this is me inside a cave in South Wales. And that's me just using the Skurian I had. They're known as Skurian. It's a Swiss company that produce caving lights. They're very bright. They come with a battery pack that lasts a long time, depending on the brightness setting. And I was using it for caving, but once I started getting into shooting abandoned structures, I really noticed just how good they were for. They've got when you put them on wide beam, they spread light almost 180 degrees. Not quite, but they've got a very wide spread of light, and there isn't a hot spot on the wide setting. They just throw light evenly in all directions. So they're very good for doing photography with. And another tip here, if you're using a manufacturer's equipment, so for example, I was using Skurian, and as I was posting my images online, I was using a hashtag and then Skurian, and using a hashtag and Manfrotto, for example. Just hashtag the manufacturer of the equipment you're using, and eventually somebody working for that company may see your posts. And if they like what you're doing, then you never know, they might send you some free equipment. So it's a really handy thing to do. So for example, this is a photograph taken inside a subterranean reservoir or cistern that is in North London. It was built in 1864 by the East London Waterworks Company. In the early part of the 1800s in London went through a series of cholera outbreaks. And we had an engineer who's quite famous these days, but there was a guy called Joseph Bazalgette. And Joseph Bazalgette was a promising engineer during the Victorian era. And he was tasked with sorting out the cholera epidemics that kept breaking out in London. Lots of people were killed. And he eventually worked out that basically foul water and effluent from factories and slaughterhouses was getting into the water supply. So we decided that the best thing to do would be to build reservoirs underground, covered reservoirs, to store the drinking water in and keep them safe from pollution. And this is one of those reservoirs. So this is under a park in North London called Finsbury Park. very quickly, this is probably the image that won me probably the biggest award I've won, which was basically 2016's Architectural Photographer of the Year. I sort of talk through how I took this shot. So this is on a tripod, obviously. This is, to get to this, you have to go down a ladder. There's in the middle of the park in Finsbury Park in London, there is a small concrete cap in the park close to a football pitch, and there's a little manhole in the top of it. So we knew where it was. We'd found out where it was. We went there years ago. This was on 2013, my first trip here, and we took some drain keys which we'd bought at a hardware store, and we went to the cover. We sunk the drain keys in, twisted and lifted the manhole off, and then went down the ladder, and you end up in here. It's about 120 meters long, and there's around eight rows like this, all running side by side, parallel with each other. And once we were down in here, we got there about 2:30 in the morning, because we didn't really want somebody walking through the park and falling down the manhole. So we did it in the early hours of the morning. And this is on a tripod. I've put the camera to bulb mode, which holds the shutter open for as long as you need it held open for. And I also put the camera on 12-second timer, which gave me 12 seconds to get into position to start the exposure. So I set my focus point, I think probably on the second or third pillars. And then I set the camera to manual focus so it wouldn't try and refocus as I started the exposure. And once the timer was beeping, I had 12 seconds to get myself into position behind this right-hand pillar. And I waited for the timer to stop, and I heard the beeping stop and the shutter open. And then I turned on my Scurion on wide beam, and I illuminated sideways. The camera couldn't see the light. I was hidden by the pillar, and I illuminated sideways, and I illuminated this area here. And then once I'd done about 8 seconds of exposure, I pressed the light source against my jumper, and then I had a tiny amount of light bead, but I turned my back to the camera and I walked behind that second pillar. And then I illuminated sideways for 8 seconds, and I did it in every single opening all the way down to the far end of the reservoir. Once I reached the far end, I turned the light source off completely, and then I climbed over this low wall in total darkness, and then I pigeon stepped down this slope until I felt my toes splash in the residual water, and then I took a very large step in the dark over, and then I ended up and I climbed over this wall, turned around, and at the far end I then lit for 8 seconds all the way back to camera in each of the openings. And as I reached the area where the camera was in, you can see this little bit here on the left. And that little squiggle there is actually a fumble with my light source. Now, I could quite easily get rid of that in Photoshop and clone it out, but I've decided I quite like that little fumble I have with the light source, so I've kept it in. But then I climbed over this wall here, I clicked off the cable release, expecting to see an image like this appear on the back of the screen. And in fact, what I did see on the rear view was NR 1540. And basically I had 15 minutes and 40 seconds of noise reduction to wait through before this image did eventually pop up. So this one shot took me just over half an hour to produce. But when eventually this image did pop up on the screen, I thought it was a real eureka moment. It was a real triumphal moment. And I thought, wow, that's definitely going to be a competition entry for me. And over the years, it's done really well. It's won one very big award and a few other awards as well. So after I'd posted this image online, somebody else told me that there was another location not that far away in London, actually in Greenwich Park, which was another subterranean cistern, slightly older, slightly earlier cistern, this one. And if you've been to Greenwich at all, and you've been to the riverside at Greenwich, you'll notice you've got the Naval College and Hospital on the banks of the Thames in Greenwich. And this is located on the hill just above the Naval Hospital. And it's designed as a clean water supply for the Naval Hospital at the bottom of the hill. It's a circular reservoir. It's in Greenwich Park, and Greenwich Park is one of the royal parks. Technically, you're not supposed to be in the royal parks at night. They've got a police force present, so it's a bit of a risky one, this one. Making our way through the park to the entrance, we had to make sure that we only saw one police car the whole time we were there, but if you caught there, you could be in trouble. So this is a slightly different lighting technique. This was earlier than both of those reservoir shots. This is taken inside a lava tube or a lava cave on the island of Lanzarote, which is one of the Spanish islands and the Canary Islands just off the coast of North Africa. And this is slightly different in that this shot is seven different photographs blended to create a composite final shot. So you can see, for example, this bit here where the wall beyond me is illuminated and my silhouette is appearing in the shot. I'm actually wearing the light source on my head. It's on the helmet. And I've illuminated the wall beyond me. and my silhouette is showing up. But in that shot, that area there was illuminated. Everything else in the picture was pitch black. So what you end up with is you end up with 7 shots with areas lit and the rest of the image is pitch black. And all you do is then, as long as you've taken the picture on a tripod, all of the images will line up with each other. Hopefully the tripod won't have moved. So you layer them in Photoshop, and then you blend all of the bits of exposure together to create a final composite. And it's just a really easy way of, when you've got a complex lighting subject, it's just a really easy way of breaking it down into little bite-sized pieces, so you can actually, and you can use the digital cameras to your advantage as well. You can look at you can review the shots you've got so far on the back of the screen and say, I've got that bit, I've got that bit, I haven't done that bit yet. So you can go and the best thing to do is maybe shoot each bit, say 3 times, and use the best version from each one. Pentax K1, this is the camera I'm currently using. It's Pentax, it came out maybe 5, 6 years ago now, the first K1. There's a K1 Mark II available as well. It's Pentax's first foray into full frame. Just a few shots now taken with the K1. This is a folly in the Cotswolds. Again, not that far, it's about an hour and 15 minutes drive from Reading. And it's a very large stone-built building that was built by basically a farmer. He was farming the land here. He was a sheep farmer, and he bought several fields and started doing the sheep farming. And he kept finding shards of really good quality stone all over the ground. And he'd built a big pile of stone up, and he thought, well, I'm going to build myself a hay barn. And if you can see where my cursor is, just there's a little archway. And originally his hay barn was it was a small arch structure there. And he built this stone structure, and he kept finding stone. And over 11 years, this huge structure just grew and grew and grew. He kind of just got carried away. This is not urbex, obviously. This is a viaduct down near the south coast, not far from Brighton. It's in a place called Balcombe, and it's one of the largest brick structures in the UK. That's millions of bricks there. This is the Balcombe Viaduct again, but looking through those open soffits in the middle, they're just designed to save bricks. They don't affect the structural integrity of the viaduct at all. They just save a lot of bricks. This is a small brick tower on the outskirts of my hometown of Reading. This is the same technique as the reservoirs really, but outdoors. I've got the camera on bulb mode so it's going to stay open for as long as I want it. And while the shutter is open, I very slowly, stage left, I just outshot, I've walked slowly up from the camera to the tower, shining the light sideways over a long exposure. This is Bodiam Castle in Sussex. It's one of the UK's probably most famous ruined castles. It's really, really popular with tourists and people that live in the UK as well. Just a couple of shots of Bodiam. That's another shot taken in the autumn. And then not far from Sussex, Bodiam Castle in Sussex, on the south coast, on the Kent coast, we've got a place called Dungeness. And it's a very, very windswept spit of shingle that sticks out into the English Channel. And all over the beach at Dungeness are the remnants of what was once a thriving fishing industry, but now just lies in ruins. So this is a relatively famous shot of one of the ruined fishing shacks with a fishing boat on the beach just beyond it. So what are the kinds of shots you can get if you're going to be doing urbex as your chosen subject? So I should actually move this set to the last of the 3 sets of these shot types. The main reason being is if you're going to shoot this sort of thing, you always do your exteriors last. And there's a good reason for that. I've fallen foul of this once. I will not make the same mistake again. We were in Luxembourg in Europe, and I was shooting an old steel plant, and the outside of the building was covered in pipe work, and it looked amazing, and the light was really nice as well. And Darren and Mark, my friends, said, well, we're going to go inside. So they went under the roller door that was lifted up, and I stayed outside to shoot the exterior. And while I was there, a security vehicle drove up behind me. And it basically chatted to me for a while, but then ejected me from the site, and I had to wait about 3-4 hours for them to finish their photography before they came out. So you always do your exteriors last. This is the exterior of a chateau that is now demolished. It doesn't exist anymore as of 2018. It is in the Ardennes region of southern Belgium, very close to the Luxembourg border. It was known as Chateau Noisy or Chateau Miranda, its later name was. It was located in an area that is quite famous for a few different things, but the chateau itself was originally a family home. During the Second World War, there were just outside of the grounds of the chateau, there was a battle between Allied forces and Axis forces. The Allied forces won the tank battle, and the German army was pushed back into the grounds of the chateau. So this actually became, in and around the grounds, and actually in parts of the chateau as well, it was a battle scene during the Battle of the Bulge. I think Christmas 1944 that was. And after the war, it became an orphanage for a while, and then it was damaged in the late 1980s, early 1990s, I think, by very high winds, and it became abandoned after that. This is a ethanol distillery in Ferrara in northern Italy. This is, I think when this was in use, Eridania, I think it was called Eridania Ethanol Distillery, and it produced 1/3 of Italy's alcohol output. So originally, during the Second World War, and before and during the Second World War, it was producing ethanol for industrial purposes. It was bombed during the Second World War, and then when it reopened after the war, it changed its purpose to produce drinking alcohol. And as I say, it produced about 1/3 of Italy's total alcohol output. This is again that same folly I just showed you a minute ago. This is the known as Collins Barn, or the people in the photography community often call it the Hobbit House. It does look a bit like something from Lord of the Rings. And on, you just see this archway here. That was the hay barn originally. This is it from face on. This is a castle in North Wales. This was, when I shot this in 2013, this was in a ruined state. There's been a trust that's been set up to try and restore the castle. And they were taking donations from people and gradually doing little tiny bits of the castle. But for the last 2 years, I don't know if you have it in America or Italy or any of the places that people are here, but there's a program called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And the UK version of that used to take place in Australia, but with COVID, the pandemic for the last 2 years, it's not taking place in Australia anymore. So they've set it in this castle, and the money that's been brought in as a result of the program being filmed here for the last 2 years has really, and the castle's just totally different now. A lot of the castle has been restored. So it's one of the success stories, really, one of these ruined places that's gradually being brought back to life. This is the frontage, pardon me. This is the frontage of a large psychiatric hospital in North Wales, known as the Denbigh Asylum. This is an alleyway between the workshops and the storage areas. The workshops on the right and the storage areas on the left. And on the first floor, you can see it's connected by this little wooden tunnel. I love this location. It's in Sheffield. It's a couple of hours drive to the north, 2.5 hours drive, maybe 3 hours to the north of Reading, about halfway up the UK basically. And it's one of those places that is often in the urbex community, in the abandoned locations community, people call these places time capsules, because it isn't just an empty shell of a building. It contains all sorts of equipment, and basically it was a factory that produced tools for leather workers and shoemakers. So it produced things like files, knives, punches, things like that. And you can go into some of the workshop areas and open drawers and find handles for the tools that they were making. A lot of the raw materials are still on site. There's even a clocking in machine with people's clock cards still sat in it. This is south of Turin in Italy. This is a place called Villa Moglia. It's about 20-minute drive outside of Turin, or Torino as it's known. It's a huge villa complex. Originally it was a family home, then it was a textile factory for a while, and its most recent iteration, before it was abandoned, it became a seminary, a religious teaching college for a Roman Catholic order called the Salesians. And the Salesians set up camp here, and I don't know quite how long they were here for, but when they finally left, it became completely abandoned. This is just a very small part of it. It's much, much bigger complex than this. This is a coal mine, funnily enough. I often, if I'm doing a talk in person, I ask people what they think this location was. And I think maybe the water in the foreground, people often say, was it a pumping station or a waterworks? And it's actually a coal mine. It's a bit bizarre. I'm not quite sure why they've designed a coal mine to look like a castle of some sort. But the actual main headstock tower, the wheels over shaft 1 were in the top of this tower here. The miners' changing area was located in this block sticking out here, and then this low building here was the electrical hookups for charging the lamps. Another type of shot, interior spaces. So if you're going to be doing shots inside buildings like this, very often these buildings, well, in almost all cases, these buildings don't have an electrical supply to them anymore. Often the insides are damp, mouldy, can be pretty unsafe at times, but also pretty gloomy as well. So to shoot the interiors of abandoned buildings, you generally have to have a tripod. So you're going to be on tripod, you're going to be using longer exposures. Just a few shots now. So what we're looking at here is the actual entrance hall below that very tall tower at Chateau Noisy or Chateau Miranda, the ruined castle I showed you at the beginning of that last set. So this is the entrance hall, shot from 2 different angles. This is maybe one of my favourite interior shots I've taken. This was a chateau in Belgium, equidistant between Liège and Charleroi in Belgium. And it's in a little village in the middle of nowhere, really. And we stopped off and we'd shot this room and various other rooms in the chateau, and we were about to leave. And just as we'd packed the cameras and tripods away, we noticed when we arrived at the location, it was raining and it was grey skies outside. And we'd finished taking our pictures. And just as we packed up, we noticed the windows got really bright and we realised the sun had broken through the clouds. So all the tripods and the bags came back out again, back onto the tripods. And there's a bit of a tip here. As long as you're fairly sure that the location you're in won't have lots of things like maybe asbestos on the floor, which wouldn't be good. You can generally go on the age of the building. This is a very old chateau, so we were fairly certain it probably didn't have asbestos on the floor. You can pick up a handful of the dust, and all you need to do is throw that dust in the air near the windows. And what happens then is the dust that's then falling down through the air it picks out the light beams. You can see this without the dust in the air. You can see the spot of light on the floor, and you can see the bright windows, but there's nothing in between. With a bit of dust in the air, you can really help the sunbeams to appear. This is another Italian location. This translates, when you translate it from Italian, translates as the Palace Casino. I've forgotten exactly where this was. It was somewhere, it was northish in Italy, but it wasn't as far north as places like Milan or Turin. It was on our way back up. It was on a trip we did from Rome all the way up to Turin at the end. And this is on the first floor. And it's one of those locations that really sticks in my memory. Obviously, photography is photography. You're there. It's a very, very visual thing. But the actual experience of doing it can often be sensory in lots of different ways. And I think the fact that we were here, outside, it was clear blue skies. There was no clouds in the sky at all. And we found our way into the building. The entry point was where we were told it was. We got into the building, and outside, it was really, really hot. But inside the building, with all the shutters on the windows, it's actually very cool inside the building. So that was nice for a start. It was very quiet inside. And actually, while we were working, all we could really hear, apart from the scrape of our own feet every now and then, all we could hear while we were in there was shh, and it was the sound of the cicadas outside in the undergrowth just coming in the windows. So it really sticks in my memory from that point of view. It felt very exotic and very different from the UK. So if you go out through the doors ahead of me and you turn left and you go, there's a double sweep of staircase. You go through the doors, you can go left or right and then round a sweep of a staircase, and you end up at this point on the floor below. So that's in the room directly below where we were above. And you see places like this, and you see lots of places like this in Italy, and it's just, you cannot believe that these places are abandoned. I have got a bit of an explanation later. Somebody, one of my Italian followers on my social media, did explain why some of these places are abandoned. So I'll cover that when I get to the other location later on. This is another one. This won actually an award based out of Redding in California. This was an international award called the North Valley Art League International Photography Award. And this I always give my shots names when I post them online. And I called this one Delft School of Cookery. It wasn't me that realised it, but somebody online when I posted it said, oh, it looks really like one of the sort of Dutch paintings, the Delft School of Painting. And he said it looks a little bit like a setup of a Vermeer painting. The light is on the left-hand side, like it is in all Vermeer paintings, and it's got a very rustic feel to it. And I've called that one that. And when I posted it online, something I didn't realise at the time, I just didn't spot it. But after I posted it online, somebody said to me, wood for dinner. And then I realised that probably a photographer before me, somebody else that had been there previous to me, had basically loaded up the actual compartment which should have had the food in with wood. I think probably the wood should have gone in the drawer below that. So yeah, people say to me, do you ever set shots up? And my answer is no, I do not. It would feel totally fake if I did that. However, I'm under no illusion that very often I'm not the first person at the location, and very often you see stuff that looks like it could have been left from the previous occupants when they abandoned the place, but very often it probably won't be. It will have been a previous photographer that will set something up. This is a basement area in a theatre in the city of Liège in Belgium, a very heavily industrial city. And there's on the banks of the Meuse River here, there are a series of blast furnaces. There were 3 blast furnaces. There's now 1 remaining. The other 2 have been demolished. But just outside of the city as well, there's a steelworks to convert the pig iron that the blast furnaces produced into steel. We've done two of the blast furnaces and the steelworks. But this was a theatre that was designed to be entertainment for a lot of the steelworkers in the town. But then after, I think the Chinese steel has played a large role in decimating a lot of the other countries in the world steel industries. And Liège is one of the towns in Belgium that was very heavily affected by it. And lots of the houses in the area are completely abandoned, as well as a lot of the theatres and restaurants. There's entire sections of Liège, like the old town anyway, that are completely abandoned. This is again in Belgium. I don't know why, but Belgium seems to have per capita or per square mile more abandonments than any other country in the world. Maybe not, but it's certainly high up there. That's got an awful lot. This was a place called the Hanselbeurs building in Antwerp, very close to the Dutch border. And it was a stock exchange, a historic stock exchange. This building has now been, I haven't been to it since it's been restored, redeveloped, but it's been redeveloped by the Marriott group of hotels who've taken ownership of it and converted the structure into an event space now. So if you're in Antwerp ever, go to the Hanselbeurs building and take a look at this space here, because I think it's I've seen photos of it online, but now it's been done up, it looks amazing. So go and have a look. This is a castle. I cannot remember the name of the town it's in. It's another Italian location. It's on the outskirts of a small town. And I normally make an apology when I do this to camera clubs in the UK, because I'm going to say, I often say something at this point that's basically putting down the UK in a way. It's a bit negative, but I've experienced enough locations in the UK to know that if this location existed in the UK for as long as it had been abandoned for, it would be smashed to pieces. It would be covered in graffiti, and everything would be smashed. This castle has been in an abandoned state for quite a long time, decades, I think. And it is pretty, it's got about 3 or 4 rooms on the ground floor that are covered in the most incredible fresco work, mouldings, carved wood, and it's still pretty damn impressive. And that staircase you're looking at there is also the same castle. This is an abandoned school on the outskirts of Berkshire, the county I live in, the UK. And it was a school that was abandoned in the late 1980s. There was a programme on British TV called That's Life. A presenter called Esther Ranson presented the programme. And it did a lot of current affairs, a lot of social issues on the programme. And the programme was instrumental in uncovering an abuse scandal involving several teachers at the school and several pupils. And the school was closed down immediately, and it remained abandoned ever since. Details and objects. So I'm assuming that we take a break for people to have a drink, which isn't what normally happens in most club talks I do. So what I normally do is I get to the end of this section and then we do this. Let me know if you just want to go straight through, because I can do that as well. So details and objects. These are the kinds of shots that when I post online, when I post to my audience, they're all they're all popular, and they all tell, all of the types of shots tell the story of the location. All of them together really do the best job of that. However, I often find that it's these detail and object shots that get the most number of comments. And I think it's because they show the human side. They show who it was that maybe lived or worked there. And it's just, yeah, it's a bit like detective work. People can really tell more from these shots than any of the other types. So this is, again, Italy. This is a religious commune. It's a walled commune located out in rural northern Italy. And there were several sort of residential blocks within the walled off area, as well as a chapel in the center of the and this is the icon and the apse area, the frescoed apse at the one end of the chapel. And again, the craftsmanship and workmanship here on the fresco work here was just mind-boggling. And again, it's been abandoned for a long time, and it's untouched, and it's not vandalized. It's really, really rare to find places that have been abandoned for a long time and have not been vandalized. This on the left is high pressure steam pipes in a power station in central Belgium, in a place called Rouen, and it's no longer there. This power station is gone now. On the right, we have parquet flooring, wooden flooring tiles that have been taken up off the floor and stacked against the pews in a synagogue in Liverpool, in the UK. The shot on the left, when I first posted that online, I titled that shot "The Ever Present." I think if you're the kind of person that has an arachnophobia, you really don't like spiders all that much, then maybe urbex is not the hobby for you. I've been in a very low ceilinged barn. The ceiling of the barn was draped in cobwebs everywhere. I was in there photographing, and then Darren, my friend, came in and said, "Oh, have you finished in here?" Because he was going to take over from me. And he got close to me. He said, "Do you realise there's a really big spider on the back of your shoulder?" And he kindly brushed it off for me. But I don't love spiders, but I think I've sort of got used to them over the years. You're around them a lot when you're in these old abandoned locations. The shot on the right is a 10-foot tall piece of stenciled graffiti. I generally don't like seeing graffiti, particularly in historic locations, which this one was actually, but every now and then I come across something that kind of very hypocritically makes me sort of reverse my position. This was, as I say, 10 foot tall, this piece of graffiti. It was really impressive. And I've actually spoken to the guy. If you look down by the heel here, you've got JPS. He's got his own Facebook page. So I've chatted to him online, and I showed him the picture, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember that one. It took me all night to do that with a team of helpers." Again, one of those other things that you often find in industrial locations is in industrial places, you've got often security there in the day, but at night time security generally are not on site. And that's when your roofing material thieves come in and they steal all your roofing materials. And then in the daytime, once the roofs have gone, then you get water ingress, rain starts getting inside the building. And then in the daytime, if you've got lots of windows, when the sun comes out, the wet interiors get very humid, and then you start getting ferns growing inside as well. So it's that sort of juxtaposition of the interior space of these very stark industrial buildings, but with a carpet of green growing over the floor as well. Sort of always makes for a good photograph. On the left, we have a close-up of the steering wheel inside a Mercedes Unimog truck in a vehicle graveyard in southern Belgium, not far from Chateau Noisy, actually. That was fairly close by. And on the right, we have the inside of the science laboratory chemical storage cupboard at Crookham Court School, which is the school that was closed down because of the abuse scandal. Blast furnace over on the left, lots of pipe work snaking around the main central shell of the central tower of the blast furnace. Centred, and we got close up on hardback books in a library of an abandoned house in the UK, and there's a full set of images. So if you just remember those books in the middle there, I'll talk a little bit more about those later. And then we've got on the right, we've got a wrecked stained glass window in a church in Belgium. So this is the point I normally say, if you normally have drinks, somebody let me know. If you have drinks at this point, like a short break, we can do that. Otherwise, I can just go straight through.
Hi, Matt. Yes, let's take a quick 5-minute break, and our Matt will put up a counter for us.
Yes, I'll stop sharing for the moment.
What's his name? Matt.
Yes.
Oh, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, we can hear you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I noticed the picture of the school chemical laboratory closet.
Yep.
And I know from my previous work that those can be some of the most dangerous places that you could possibly shoot.
Right.
Because often abandoned chemicals at schools crystallize and
Yeah.
actually can become explosive.
Oh, really? Yeah, so I was aware that potentially there could be some danger in there. So I stood at the entrance to the cupboard and didn't go in. I just basically set my tripod up at the entrance door, but I certainly didn't go in because actually some of the bottles had fallen onto the floor and were on the floor as well. So yeah, I did not go in. I wouldn't have risked it.
Yeah, the broken ones on the floor probably weren't a problem. The problem
Yep.
becomes ones on the shelf that the material inside basically crystallizes, and
Yes.
those crystals become explosive
Wow.
if they get jostled or turned or crushed. So yeah,
Okay, well, no, I survived the trip. So yeah, I mean, I think,
that's a good thing.
yeah. So actually, the Crookham Court School has actually been redeveloped now. It's not actually in use at the moment because the science wing was not part of the main building, the main stone building there, and I think that all of the outlying buildings have been demolished now, so they've gone, and actually the main building, the main school building, has been mostly turned into a reasonably good-looking, functioning building again. But the developer who did the work ran out of money before they finished it, and went bust. So the building still isn't being used, even though a lot of it looks pretty good now. I'm just going to grab myself some water.
Matt, it looks like our countdown is over.
I'll carry on then.
Back to you. This is great. Thank you.
No problem. So back to the presentation. This is known, I've called this one Industrial Revolution Era Textile Factory. This is maybe one of the oldest abandoned locations with plenty of history to be able to be researched, and I think I've shot. So in the UK, I think in large parts of Europe, to be honest with you, the Industrial Revolution really got going sort of about 1730s. This particular factory opened in 1760, and it's in two parts. It's located in Somerset, which is one of the southwestern counties in the UK, down near Devon and Cornwall. It's the county before Devon, and then you've got Cornwall. And it's located in a town called Wellington in Somerset. It's lots of rolling hills, and it's got a river that flows through the valley here called the River Tone. And the district of Wellington it's in is called Tonedale. So this mill was known as Tonedale Mill. And opening in 1760, it produced woolen products. So all in the fields around the mill were sheep farming going on. So they had a really good supply of yarn for the mill. And it became one of the largest employers of the area, at one point employing well over 2,000 people from the surrounding area. It produced woolen products, and its claim to fame, really, it was known as Fox Brothers. It's still in operation today, although this factory is closed down. The actual modern day Fox Brothers runs in much smaller premises, still in Wellington, but it's got a much smaller workforce now. I think it's about 12 people that work there. And this, what we're looking at here, is some of the window bays in the main factory building, and then the warehousing, which is next to the main factory building on the right. And if I was to turn around and look on the wall directly behind me in that warehouse shot, you would see that large piece of alien graffiti on the wall. So that's where that was. One of the amazing things about the site is it contains all three stages of power generation. So originally the factory ran off of water power. So the River Tone was siphoned off into two large mill ponds next to the factory building. And there's some sluice gates in the wall of the building, which could then be opened. And the water that would then flow in channels in the floor into the factory, and then it would turn a large water wheel. Now, I don't think I've added it to the presentation. I should do. But I've got a shot of the water wheel. So you can see the water wheel in one room, but there's also, I'll show you later, you'll see steam generation, steam power generation, and also electrical generation as well. So it's got all three evidence of all three stages of power generation on site. And what you're looking at in this oldest part of the site here, you're looking at all of the wheels and the belts and pulleys that ran all of the machines using water power when the factory first opened. Some cloth hanging on the wall, and some of the dye vats in the main part, the dyeing part of the site, where the wool was dyed. On the left, we have this curious looking machine. And earlier when I said, I think if it's the sort of hobby that if you're interested in stuff, it will teach you all sorts of stuff. And a lot of the time, the stuff it will teach you is it's interesting, but it's pretty pointless information that you're not going to really ever need it in life. But this machine is a curious one. If you look on the left, there's a drum there, and that drum has clamped thistle heads, or teasels, as they're sometimes known. So teasel heads clamped onto the drum, and all of the prickles on the teasels all point in one direction. So it's got a grain to it. So it baffled me when I saw this machine. And I got home from having done my first shoot here, and I went on the internet and I searched for historic textile production thistle heads or thistles. And literally in the first search, I found this entry called teasel napper. So the machine was known as the teasel napper. So I learned that. And basically what a teasel napper does is the drum rotates with the teasels clamped to it. And then the wool that they're working on, the wool product that they've created, it's brought using a series of rollers into very close contact with the teasels. And the teasels pick at the surface of the wool and they raise the nap on the material. And then once you've got a nice fluffy nap, then a very sharp blade shears it back again. And what you're left with is a much shorter fluff, but it's actually very, very even, but it's very soft surface to the wool. So it's just one way of treating the materials, how historic textile production was done. Some more dye vats on the right. These carts were located all over the factory, all over the main factory floor. And you can see there on the shot on the right, there's a roll of material there as well. One of the electrical panels on what's known as an autoconer, and in the next shot you'll see the main machines. These are the autoconers in the main factory building, obviously run by electricity. These autoconers were where the wool was wound onto those plastic cone things, I guess, before they were then sold onto retail. Here we have the electrical generation inside one of the sheds on site. And if you walk through an archway into the next room, you walk into this room, which was where the steam generators were. So as you see, I should put the water wheel in the presentation really, but it's got 3 stages of power generation. For that reason, I absolutely love this site. It's like walking into your own private museum, this place, and having the place to yourself for the day. No, actually, I've talked down the UK and said there was quite a lot of vandalism, but actually at this site there's very little vandalism. Shoreham Cement Works, down close to Brighton on the south coast in Sussex. Cement kilns here. There's 2 cement kilns, and we're looking here on the upper right hand side shot. These chains are basically inside that kiln, so I've climbed inside the kiln there to get a shot of these chains. These kilns slowly rotate. They're fired inside. They've got very hot air inside when it's in operation. All the raw materials are poured in at the top end, and then as they slowly work their way down slope, the chains just churn and mix all of the materials together. And out the bottom here comes your finished cement mix, which is then packaged up and then sent off for selling. Some more shots of the kilns. I've been here twice. This was the first time we went, and we got a really nice misty morning. Again, fisheye shot. This location, I haven't actually got a title on this one. I think I often like to ask people, I think it's probably easy if you live in the UK. This is a location I often say, who knows where this one is? And the clue really is in the shadows on the river. It's in London, and it's a fairly famous power station in London called Battersea Power Station on the banks of the Thames in central London. And the reason I absolutely love doing this location, I lived in London for about 4 years, just after I qualified, just after I did my degree, and we had to move out of London in the end. It was just too expensive to live there. But I used to pass by this building on a regular basis. It's a really, if you're into Pink Floyd at all, you've ever seen the Pink Floyd album called Animals, and you've seen the towers of Battersea Power Station with the pig floating above it. That's one of the things that's made the power station there very famous. At the moment, it's being redeveloped into a very fancy, like a mini city really. It's going to be lots of people living there and lots of amenities and cinemas and shopping centres. But in 2013, somebody in the community said to me, did you realise that Battersea Power Station was currently accessible? They were about to start the redevelopment work, and Battersea has 2 different control rooms. It was built in 2 halves. You've got A side, which is this side here, and you've got B side. Now, A side was built in the 1920s, and B side was built in the 1950s. And the first weekend I went Friday and Saturday night, and I also went the next weekend on Friday and Saturday night. So four days I went. And the first weekend, the first Friday and Saturday, I could only find my way to B side. So just a few shots now from B side control room, which is the 1950s control room. Just close-ups now of the back wall of the control room. I've got lots of amp meters, some fuse boxes, switchgear, Bakelite levers, wheels, all sorts of different controls and electrical readouts. Just looking along a row of amp meters, and also on the right-hand shot, that's known as a synchroscope. The synchroscope was designed to, when the output of the power station was about to be synced with the national grid, with the external power supply of the city, they had to make sure that the voltage and all of the settings for the electricity were aligned with the national grid before they synced it up. Otherwise, you could end up melting circuits and melting wires. So that was a synchroscope that was designed, and that synchroscope was used on an album cover for the band Hawkwind back in the 1970s. I think that album came out. Just a few more gauge cabinets in B-side control room. Close up of that back wall again, stepping back now from that, slightly wider shot. And now this last shot in B-side was probably my favourites. One of my favourite shots I took in B-side, and something about the warm coppery tones on this one. It's a 3-shot horizontal stitch, so it's a panoramic image, this one. And after I posted my shots of B-side control room, somebody else in the community said, why have I not seen any shots of A-side from you? And I said, well, I can't find a way in. I've looked and looked and looked, and I cannot get into A-side. So he gave me an additional bit of information that when we went back the next weekend did involve a little bit of climbing. It was possibly a little bit dangerous, but we went back and we found our way into A-side control room. And this was built in the 1920s. It was built in the Art Deco style. Very, very large control room, this one. We're at one end of the control room here, looking down to the far end. We've got that's the main control desk. In the middle, that's halfway down the control room. And the thing I love about this control room is the history is just so visual in here. And you look along the top, we've got direct coupled exciter, standby exciter, main bus reactor 5, bus coupler 5, and then you've got Ealing 2 and Ealing 1. Now, Ealing's a district of London. And a bit further down, you've got Fulham T, and Leonard Road, and a bit further down you've got Carnaby Street. You've got all of the districts of London that it supplied power to listed on the cabinets on the back wall. This particular control room is grade 1 listed. Now in the UK we use a grading system for how historic and important the heritage is in that building. And if a building is grade 1, it means that if you're a developer and you're going to be doing work on the building, you have to preserve the building in its current state. You cannot do anything to it. You can protect it and you can improve it, but you have to be true to its original design. You cannot scrap it or rip it out. If the building is grade 2 listed, which B-side control room, for example, was grade 2 listed, means that you can, to a degree, and in certain cases you possibly could demolish it, but you have to apply for permission. It's difficult to get, but grade 1 basically means that you can't do anything to it. You have to keep it. So I have spoken to the Battersea Power Station Development Company, and they've confirmed that this particular space, when the building is finished, when the work on the building is done, will become a restaurant. So I can only hope that it's going to clearly be a very expensive restaurant. You're going to be sitting in this industrial location, eating fine dining, as it were. And I can only hope that they have open days where they let people in from London, tourists in, to actually look at the history in this room, because it would be a real shame if only the very, very wealthy people could afford to go in and sit and eat sit and have their evening meals in here. This is a shot at the main control desk in the middle of A-side control room. The first time I got in on that 3rd trip up to London, I got in, but I could only light things using my portable lights because I couldn't find where the builder's generators were. And on that very final trip, my fourth trip in there, I found where the builder's generator was. So on the left, we've got the central control desk lit up using my portable lights. And then finally, on that last trip, I found where the builder's generator was. I flicked the switch on the builder's generator, and the power came on and all the lights in the control room came on. I must admit, I was a little bit nervous about having the lights in the control room on because it does have some windows that face out. So I was concerned that once we turned the lights on, that security would soon be in there. And while we were shooting in there on that final trip, we did hear footsteps outside the control room. We were prepared to get caught by the security. But the doors open and in walked 3 more photographers. So we got away with it. And then the final shot from the central control desk, looking down to the far end of the building. Onto the next location. The Farm School. This is a location in Waterloo in Belgium, not far from Brussels. And we were here to shoot a long corridor that we knew about. We were on our way back from shooting in eastern Belgium, in Liège, in places close to the German border. And we were racing back across Belgium to make the ferry at Calais in France. And we were making really good time. So I said to Darren, we've got loads of time. We'll be back there in an hour. Or an hour and a bit. Should we stop somewhere if we've got a few hours yet? So we decided to look at the map again, and we called in at this place in Waterloo, and we were here to shoot this corridor. But once we got here, we realised there was also this gymnasium left behind. So we did a quick shot in there, and then we moved on to the main corridor. And really, this corridor, it was being demolished at the time. It used, as I say, it used to be a school, but it's now been redeveloped into a retirement village. Unfortunately, this corridor is one of the success stories, really. This has been retained. So a lot of the other buildings that were around this long corridor, they were satellite buildings off of this corridor, that the main school was. But so all of the buildings around it went, and this corridor was retained, and now the retirement village is centered around this long corridor as well. And what you're looking at on the left shot here is actually at the far end of the corridor using a 200mm lens. And then what we're looking at on the right is actually a wide angle 10mm shot, actually in this central chamber here. So you've got, I think it might be that one there, or that one there. There's several chambers along the corridor, and what we're at here is actually one of the, you can see the difference between the long lens and the wide angle lens, those doors at the far end of the corridor, even though we're halfway along the corridor at this point, with a wide angle lens has thrown those doors really far away into the background. Abandoned Welsh farmhouse. So this is a location, actually most of these locations in this presentation were done in my first few years, maybe my first 4 years. But I did a talk to a Welsh camera club last year, in fact it was, at Llanelli Camera Club, and they asked if I could include some Welsh locations. So I've added this one and one at the very end of the presentation in for them really, and that they're still in here. But this one and the one at the end are locations I've shot in the last, since lockdowns really, since the pandemic. So this is a really amazing location in that it was one of those places that still is full of objects from the previous owner. It's located on the Isle of Anglesey in North Wales, miles away from anywhere. It's just a little farm cottage surrounded by just fields and farmland. So we had to walk a fair way across fields to reach the farmhouse, climbed in a window, and the interior is just full of the previous occupant's possessions still. Another time capsule, as it were. So this is a sideboard, one of the dressers in the house. You can just see how old everything is in here, and you would have to assume that these vases probably, I mean, you just don't know, they could be worth a fortune. But that's one of the things I really like about the urbex community, is I've seen pictures of these vases still in situ since I've been here, and generally most people, you have to be careful who you tell about these locations, because sometimes people will go and they'll fill their bags up and sell stuff on eBay. But a lot of the time, most photographers generally have a lot of respect for the locations, and you see things like this and they're still there in subsequent shots. So generally people don't go and turn up and steal stuff. This was in the kitchen. Again, lots of paraphernalia and bric-a-brac in the kitchen here. Maybe that I've got, when I'm shooting places like that, I often have, I've got a series of shots called Up, which are symmetrical views looking straight up in various abandoned architecture. I've also got a whole series on doors and windows as well, and my window series is huge. I've got umpteen really unusual looking window shots, and this is probably the grimiest window I think I've shot before. A portrait hanging on a wall in the main corridor in the farmhouse. A dresser in one of the downstairs rooms. Really atmospheric room, this one, full of the Singer sewing machine on the side of the dresser, lots of other stuff. Upstairs into the only bedroom in the farmhouse, you can see over beyond the bed there, there's some pretty structurally unsound, some of the walls and the cracks going through multiple floors, but really lovely atmosphere in this room. By one of the beds, probably again another setup from a previous photographer, I have no doubt. And then another angle on that bed and that crack in the wall. Manicomio de Raccognigi, I think that's how you pronounce it. Maybe I can be corrected otherwise. Raccognigi, if you look on Google Maps, is a small town village to the south of Turin, about 30 kilometers to the south of Turin. It's a relatively small town. If you look on Google Maps, you will see Raccognigi is basically a small village town dominated by a very large figure-of-8 shaped building. And what we're looking at here is one part of the figure-of-8. So if you imagine this block here is the central part of the 8, the arm in the middle of the 8. And if you go over that, there'll be another open garden pavilion like this one on the other side of it. And this very large building, this manicomio, or effectively translates as psychiatric hospital, was closed down in the late 1980s, but I think it opened in the 1930s. And one of its, I say claims to fame, possibly claim to infamy really, is it was the first location in Europe outside of America where prefrontal lobe lobotomies took place. So it was a pioneering hospital from that point of view, in that it was the first place in Europe for lobotomies. And in this central block here is where the medical wing was. And there's some of the surgical equipment that's still in situ in there. Another one of those time capsule locations. People often say to me, what's your favorite location you've ever shot? And probably the very first location I shot, the jet engine place, it blew my mind, that place, and I will never see the likes of it again. But this building here it's definitely my top 5, possibly my number 2. It's a very big building. It is full of shots. There is shots everywhere you go in this building. So this is the entrance hall. One of the things I absolutely love about classical Italian architecture, even when it's not abandoned, it looks amazing. It's just so elaborate and beautiful. But I might be alone here, but I find that when this classical Italian architecture, the Rococo stuff all starts to fall apart, and it's been abandoned for a while, and the plasterwork starts to fall off in clumps, the fresco and paintwork starts to peel. For me, it just looks even more beautiful. So you can see that from this entrance hall. It's just absolutely stunning. Corridors everywhere inside the building. Just 3 different corridors here on different floors. And you can see in that central bit, you can see there's a few of the flooring tiles are actually up off the floor, and underneath that there's some dust. Just like in that previous shot I did in Belgium, I've picked up a handful of dust and thrown it in the air by the windows here and created some nice some light rays, dust rays as it were. And again, another corridor in the hospital, shot a year and a half apart. I've been to this hospital twice. It's the same corridor, shot looking in 2 different directions, using 2 different cameras actually. One of the cloisters that runs around the garden pavilions. One of the garden pavilions was designed for male patients, and the other one was for female patients. This is a 3-shot horizontal panoramic in the corner of one of the cloisters. This is a sub-basement area located below a sports hall. There's a very quick story I tell here. Personally, I do not believe in the supernatural at all. I don't get scared when I'm in buildings like this. Sometimes even, not very often, I'm normally with at least one other person, but generally I don't mind going into spooky buildings and being in there just as it's getting light or just as it's getting dark. And walking off from my friends and taking pictures. I generally don't get scared because I don't believe I'm going to experience anything. So that side of it doesn't bother me. But I had, in the hall above me, I had my first and very, very convincing supernatural experience, which had me, at least for an hour and a half, firmly believing. And I was just setting up the camera on a tripod to take a shot, and I was adjusting the arms of the little adjustable arms on the tripod and just getting everything nice and square. And if you use a tripod, you'll know that when you're fiddling with the arms and getting everything just tweaked just right, you can be really in the zone. You can really focus on it. And while I was doing that, right behind me, and I didn't really pay any attention to it the first time, a little handbell ding-a-ling-a-ling rang just behind me. But I was so in the zone, I didn't really pay attention. It was only when it rang a second time, 10 seconds or so later, that I became aware that I had already heard that sound. And I suddenly turned around and looked behind me. There was nobody behind me, and the sound I heard was right behind me. And all my hair stood on end, and I thought, what on earth was that? And there were some cupboards just behind me at the back of the hall. So I opened the doors thinking either Darren or Lex would be in the cupboards, and there was nobody there. And I didn't even take the shot. I picked the tripod up and I left the hall immediately, and I started calling for them. And eventually they answered, and they were at the front of the hospital. And I told them what had happened. And Lex said to me, look, calm down, calm down. I believe you. And I said, no, I'm being serious. He said, I can tell you're being serious. But he said, there has to be a rational explanation for it. And anyway, we all stayed fairly close to each other after that. And maybe about an hour later, we left and we were in the car on the way to the second location of the day. And we were 10 minutes away from this site. We were in the car, ding-a-ling-a-ling. And Lex said to me, was that the sound? And I said, yeah. And he said, it's your bloody phone. And I said, I've never heard that sound before in my life. And just as I said those words, I remembered as we turned up at the hospital, I just turned on data roaming on my phone. And I just downloaded and installed a brand new email app on my phone, and it was the notification sound of a new email that I'd never heard before on my phone, which was basically in my back pocket. So in the space of an hour and a half, I'd gone from non-believer to believer, to even more staunch non-believer than before. So next shot, this is the windows at the dormitory areas at the hospital. All around the areas where the dormitories were, where the patients slept, all of the windows had bars on them. This is in the admin block above the main entrance hall. And on the left is a shot that won again. Actually, this was the shot that won. I showed you the Delft School of Cookery earlier. That actually didn't win. It came second in the North Valley Art League based out of California. But a couple of years later, the image on the left, which is called Patient Records, that won the North Valley Art League award. And it's basically showing an area of cupboards in the hospital where patient records were being stored. And I don't know why, but when the hospital was left and abandoned, really, all of this paperwork should have been removed. We did pick up a few pieces of paper off the floor, and it was quite clearly patient treatment records. But for some reason, they're all over the floor here. At one point, they probably were in all these storage units. I think really, considering they are patient treatment records, it's quite a poignant shot. Probably that's one of the reasons it won the competition, just because it does have a certain poignancy to it. Obviously, we can't speak Italian, we can't read Italian, so we weren't able to actually read any of the records. And that shot there on the right hand side is again on that trip I did a year and a half later with a slightly different camera. But you can see all the records were still there. Close up on the storage cupboards. And in the next room, I say I've never encountered any graffiti or damage in Italy. This is probably arson. I would have thought this is somebody had attempted to set fire to this. This is a mirror image room from those cupboards you saw in the previous shot. So it's just in the next room, basically. Quite clearly, there's some fire damage occurred here. Patient doctor's surgery on the left. This was the stub room. You couldn't actually move. Once you'd gone through those doors on the left-hand shot, there was no way on. So I'm assuming that was a doctor's surgery. And this was the waiting area outside the doctor's surgery. And on the right there, we've got this sinister-looking, it's a gurney. It's not really a gurney. It's something that the patient would have stood in, and then they could be rotated into a horizontal position for staff to actually to do an inspection on the patient. And on the floor below this, which was in the central medical block, we've got rooms like this, which was really quite sinister, some of these rooms. And they've been there, as I say, late 1980s, the hospital closed down. So some of the surgical areas, there are also dental suites there as well. The underwater ballroom. This is a location that's in the UK. It's probably one of the most unusual locations I've shot to date. Somebody, pardon me, I'll have a drink. When somebody described this location to me, it was one of those locations that I didn't actually believe was real. When somebody said to me, oh yeah, there's a dome and it's under the water. You can actually go down into this dome and it's got all windows in it and you're actually under the lake looking out into the water. I was like, no, rubbish, I don't believe it. And they said, well, the pictures are online, you can look at them. So I had a quick look, and sure enough, there are pictures of it. And so it's one of those locations I had to go and shoot. So what we've got here is Thursley Lake, and the story, but it's quite an interesting story behind the underwater ballroom. It's just a nickname. It was never really a ballroom. It was a billiards and smoking room underneath the water. Basically, there was a guy during the Victorian era who was called Whitaker Wright, and Whitaker Wright was effectively a Victorian version of Bernie Madoff. He basically swindled other business owners out of vast sums of money. And then what he did, once he'd got enough money together, he bought a large plot of land down in Surrey. Surrey. And this lake here, Thursley Lake, didn't exist. It was dug out by 120, it took 120 men nearly 2 years using rotavating digging machines. And it's 12 feet deep. It's several hundred meters long by about 100 meters wide. They dug the lake out, and they also dug 2 smaller pond-style lakes at slightly higher levels. And what happens there is the water is pumped from pump houses. It's pumped up into the smaller ponds, and then it cascades through a series of waterfalls back into the main lake. But as I say, when the estate was first bought, none of the lakes existed at all. They were all dug by hand. This is one of the pump houses on the main lake. You can see I got there nice and early. I actually got there while it was still dark, but this is after the sun had started to come up. There's a nice lot of mist on the lake surface. Again, that's the pump house again, looking across its entry gantry. And then one of the islands, the landscaped islands that they left in situ on the lake and then planted with trees. So once the only way to get into the underwater ballroom, you can't go in on the lake side. There's a spiral staircase with a skylight that you can see there on the lake edge. if you were to attempt to get into it down that way, just once you go down the stairs from here, you get just below this point here, there's an iron door, a carved iron door. And if you try and tamper with that door, an alarm would go off and security would be there in no time. So the only way to get into the underwater ballroom was to basically go to the lake edge using some kind of inflatable. And it's one of the most surreal things I think I've ever done. I climbed over the outer wall of the estate at 3:30 in the morning with a large rubber ring that what my sons used to play in the pool with. And I had the half inflated rubber ring under my arm. I had my camera bag, I had my tripod, I had a plastic bag with a change of clothes in it. And I pumped it up on the lake edge, put it into the lake, sat in it in a pair of shorts effectively. And then I started paddling using a sawn off decking board, which I had in my shed. I started paddling out towards the island. And by the time I set off, it was gone 4 a.m. And I could not see the island because at that time in the morning, the mist was really thick. All I could see in the moonlight was the top of Neptune's head and his arm. So I used that as my navigation, and I set off from over on the left of this shot. I set off, eventually finding the island and climbing up over the stone balustrade onto the island, and then down the staircase on the island. So that shot there, that skylight that's what you would see when you're down underneath in the tunnel that leads under the lake, and that shot on the right is slightly back along the tunnel from the staircase. Now, if you move along the tunnel, you end up underneath the dome, which Neptune stands on top of. And what we're looking at here is all my lights are turned off, and this is the morning light. It's a long exposure, but this is the morning light just starting to illuminate the underwater windows. And you can see this is obviously, it's a dome, it's not a flat surface. So what we're looking at here is as you come around, it's curving around me, and you can see the silt at the windows which are close to the bottom of the lake, which have been silted up over time. And considering this was built in the 1880s, as I say, it's 140 odd years now, or 140-ish years, Victorian engineering for you. It's an underwater structure and it does not leak. That's just blows my mind. I think if this was a modern construction, it most definitely would leak, probably in a much quicker time. So turning the lights on now, that's the same shot again, but with the lights turned on. Well, not my portable lights turned on. And then finally a shot of the dome, but looking back along the tunnel to that staircase. Again, just so amazing that something like this even exists. Apparently, I've spoken to the owner about this, the guy that owns the estate, and he said there is one other, and it's in France, a very similar structure, but a highly unusual structure. Bull Manor, you've already seen some close-ups of some hardback books on a library bookshelf. This is, for me, was probably one of the most impressive abandoned residential locations I've shot in the UK. It's actually not listed. So I mentioned the grade listing process earlier for protecting buildings. It should be listed really, this building, but it's not. And I don't know why it's not. If you go to the entrance, this is on farmland near Windsor, not far from Reading. If you go to the entrance to the farm that this house sits on one of the fields, you will see a blue plaque, and blue plaques are used all over the UK to denote the fact that somebody famous used to live there. And if you go to Birkin Manor Farm, which is where this is, and you look at the blue plaque, you will see the name John Milton, poet, it says. And John Milton wrote Paradise Lost in the 16th century. And this was John Milton's family home when he was young. So it dates back to the 1600s. And as a result of having somebody like a famous writer who lived there, I don't know why the property is not listed, not protected, but it's not. The person that owns it is a busy farmer. I'm not going to judge the farmer really. He's got loads of work to be getting on with. The house happens to exist on his land. He's not fussed by the building at all really. It's allowing it just to collapse bit by bit. But the reason it's called Bull Manor is lots of photographers in the UK became obsessed. Well, photographers that shoot this kind of subject became obsessed by this house because it was amazing inside. And he got so fed up with people trekking across his fields to gain access to the house that he installed a bull in the field around the house. So if you wanted to go and see it, not only did you need to negotiate the razor wire and the Harris fencing, you also had to negotiate the bull. But once you're inside the house, again, it's another time capsule house. It's full of objects still. This is one of the upstairs room. Some chess pieces on the floor of that room. Ground floor storage room. And I really like all the cobwebs. were clustered around the window here, and also some of the brambles and the foliage that had made their way inside from outside. Some of the holes in the window, basically some of the brambles outside were just growing inside. Upstairs in the library, you've already seen a close-up of that left-handmost cabinet there. This room was just amazing. You would have to assume that out of the many thousands of hardback books that were in this library, some of them were probably first editions. And I took that close-up of that thing there, and because I had that close-up, I just did a hypothetical search for some of the book titles that I could actually read, and I put them into eBay and I put first edition. And some of the books that I've got in that close-up shot, if they happen to be first editions, they were worth hundreds of pounds each. And there are literally thousands of books in this library. So it's baffling why the owner, the farmer who owns the land here, isn't doing anything with this house, but he's just allowed. You can see that the plastering lath's gone from the ceiling here and is all over the floor. But bit by bit, the house will collapse one day. Bottom of the stairs, main staircase, typewriter and portrait, probably of a previous owner. And then the taxidermy that makes its way around the various rooms of the house in different shots that I've seen based upon the whim of the photographers who are shooting there. And then finally, the last shot from here is one of the music rooms on the ground floor. Just so beautiful, the inside of this house. The decay here is just mega. Loved it. Abandoned NATO satellite communication station. This was an American base in Belgium, in a village called Kester. It was a NATO listening post. It's a single geodesic dome, one of these domes that you see dotted around the landscape. And American soldiers were based here up until 2012. We visited in 2014, so it had been abandoned for 2 years when we visited. And you see these domes all over, I mean, all over the world, but I see them in the UK. And I always used to wonder what's inside those bizarre structures. So this was my opportunity to find out. We got inside. This is a 3-shot horizontal panoramic stitched together. It actually looks a lot bigger. You see it from the outside, it probably doesn't actually look that big really. And it looks big there, but actually because this is a panoramic stitch, what you're looking at here is the sides are actually wrapping round. So it actually makes it look a lot bigger than it is. It's not, it was quite small inside. And this is a shot. I try not to do dangerous things when I'm in locations like I've got 2 boys. I don't really want to come a cropper and have some serious accident, but there was a shot inside the dish that I really wanted to get. So it was a bit foolish really, but I used that outer structure of the dish to climb up and over into the dish so I could get that shot. And then finally a shot again from outside the dome just as the sun was setting. Royal Aircraft Establishment. This is not really urbex. This was permission. Because I'd shot that very first location I showed you, the jet engine research establishment, at the other end of the runways at the airport, that the other place was close to the ends of the runways at Farnborough Airport, and at the other end of the runways there's another testing area which is basically traditional wind tunnels. And before the jet engine place was required, before jet engines were a thing, the testing was done at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, and it basically is several wind tunnels there that were powered not by compressed air at the other place. These were powered by fan blades. So these are amazing historic buildings from basically Britain's earliest attempts at putting planes in the air. So what we've got here is the control room of the R52 wind tunnel. It's a smallish wind tunnel, smaller wooden wind tunnel. And you can see over on the left side here, you've got the viewing ports for the windows for the working section of the wind tunnel, and some of the readouts and the control dials for the actual wind tunnel itself. On the left, we've got the Q121 wind tunnel, which was the largest wind tunnel on site. This could actually, I'm on the shot that I'm on the left, I'm actually stood on the testing platform here, looking across into the open mouth of the 24-foot wind tunnel. So the aperture there is 24 feet. So these large mahogany fan blades, the actual diameter of those blades there is 24 feet. And just behind the fan blades, you can see the first set of turning fins. So basically the wind tunnel is based upon a set of 4 turns. So the air coming off the fan blades goes behind the fan, and then it goes round these 45-degree turning fins. It goes to the right, it meets another set of turning fins, and it comes back on itself, another set of turning fins, another set of turning field, and then it comes back across the testing platform again. And it just goes around in a loop like that. On the right, we have the return tunnel on the wooden wind tunnel, the R52 tunnel. On the left, we have a propeller rig, which you could basically attach a set of propeller blades that were being fashioned to test for the aerodynamic nature of the propeller blades. And that is the first set of air straightening fins behind the wooden mahogany fan blades of the Q121 tunnel. Some amp meters in the R52 wind tunnel. Some of the readouts and the dials on the R52 control room readouts, and then some electrical plugs in the R52 tunnel. And that on the left is known as a balance mechanism. It's basically a very heavy pendulum, and it's located in the R52 working section. And the R52 tunnel was not a particularly big wind tunnel, and you couldn't test like full-size objects in that tunnel. That tunnel was designed for testing scale models. And what would happen in that tunnel is the scale model would be placed in front of the balance mechanism here on the left-hand shot. And then all of the turbulence coming off the model under test would basically move the pendulum, and they would take the readings from the aerodynamic nature of the model under test by taking readings off of the pendulum. And that on the right is the propeller rig shot straight on. And then finally, the Q121 fan blades shot really close up, and I'm so close here, I'm using a wide angle lens, but the only way I could get that shot was to take, it's basically a 9-shot grid. So it's 3 across the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 across the bottom. And then using a piece of software called PT GUI, I've stitched them all together to create this super, super wide shot. Villa Rosa, and we're heading into the last few locations of the presentation now. This is again another Italian location. This is again not far from Turin. Really, really impressive abandoned villa with its own attached chapel. You find that with a lot of the Italian villas. Some of the really very grand houses in Italy have their own private chapels attached. It's called Villa Rosa as a code name, effectively, to protect the location, mainly Rosa because of some of the coloration on the walls inside. Move on. So what we're looking at, if you look, you've got these doors here on the main front veranda. You've got this little circular window above these doors. If you look on this next shot, you will see those doors there and the circular window there. And that's not visible from that front of the house, but that's the main entrance hall at the front of the building. The interesting thing to notice here, and a lot of where the money gets spent in these Italian villas is often in the entrance halls. It's the first building that visitors will walk into. It's the first part of the building visitors will arrive in. So a lot of the money got spent in the decoration in the entrance halls. And very often there is 3D mouldings going on, lots of very expensive plasterwork. And in this particular villa, this entrance hall, all the walls were entirely flat and all of the decoration was painted. So it looks like it's got a lot of 3D surfaces. In fact, it doesn't at all. The walls are flat and all of these surfaces have been painted on. But the paintwork was incredibly well done. And it looked like it was 3D. But the puzzling thing about this location was actually down in the basement areas, which were often the servants' areas and the areas where the kitchens were located. This particular room was right next door to the main kitchens. The actual basement areas here did have a lot of mouldings and fresco work, very elaborate mouldings on the ceiling and walls. So this is one of the basement rooms. This is looking straight up in that room. This is on the left now. We're looking through into one of the main, very elaborate Art Nouveau staircase chambers just off of that entrance hall. And on the right is a view across the front of the villa's open air veranda at the front of the villa. Now, if we step through the doors on the left-hand shot into that staircase chamber, this is the one where I posted it. Now, perhaps at the end, the lady from Italy can confirm this. Somebody from Italy, when I posted this particular shot, and I said, it just boggles the mind that something so beautiful can be abandoned by its owners. And the person from Italy said to me, very probably the owners still own it. They still own it, they just don't live in it, because apparently if you own a very large property, well, the rules in Italy are, if you own a very large property and you are living in it, then the taxes that are due because you're living in it are pretty high. And if you can't afford to pay the taxes, then if you move out of the property, you can still own the property, but if you move out, then some certain taxes are no longer due, and you can basically still afford to keep the property, but you're not going to bankrupt yourself basically paying very high taxes. So I don't know how true that is. That's what I've been told, but perhaps we can find out at the end. And then the final shot from this set is, again, whenever there's a location that's really impressive and you don't want to get caught and chucked out by the owner or by security, you generally do that location first. We go away to Europe for several days at a time. We've done a couple of trips to Italy so far, and we'll spend 4 to 5 days there. And each morning, the location that's most important to us, we do that one first thing in the morning. And the main reason being is, as you enter the property or make your way across the grounds at 5 o'clock in the morning, the chances of somebody spotting you are very low. So you can still see, as we finished up at this location, about 10:30 this was, we've been here for quite a few hours already, you can still see the gardens behind it. The overgrown gardens are now covered in mist still. Fussell's Lower Works, this is a Somerset location based in the UK. This is an old historic ironworks site, early 1800s. It's in a wooded valley in Somerset, and it again utilised water power to run all of the machinery on site. And what we're looking at here in the background, there's 3 arched bays. They can, when they were in use, they contained what's known as tilt hammers, and they're very heavy hammering machines that lifted a very large hammer, would be slowly lifted using water power, and then when it reached the point, its highest point, it would then be dropped, and then the iron that they were working would be then ready to be hammered by this very heavy hammer. In the foreground here, what you can see is a stone pit. And these pits, there were several of them around the site. They contained water wheels, and the water wheels were what then powered the various machinery around the site. So underneath this land that I'm stood on here when I took this picture, this is actually not natural land. It's a platform that was built when the site was built, and underneath this platform are a series of stone tunnels or culverts in which the water from the nearby stream was siphoned off and allowed to flow underneath the platform to turn the water wheels. So the thing to note about this site is the whole site is constructed using archways. There's arches everywhere on the site. So we've got the main 3 tilt hammer bays that were made of arches. This is a view looking out of the tilt hammer bay on the left, and then one of the central stone pillars between 2 of the tilt hammer bays. On the left, there's an angled shot looking back at the tilt hammer bays. In a slightly different part of the site now, a much smaller archway. And at the very far northern end of the site, there is an administrative a brick building that was used as like one of the main admin buildings for the company. And again, in the main ad building, there's another archway there, and then a fireplace, an arched fireplace in the main brick building. And I've been here twice, and the second time I came here was another one of the shots one of my more recent shots, which won the Public Choice Award for the architecture category at the British Photography Awards, I think in 2020. I think it was 2020. And so basically, I hadn't managed to go into the tunnels on my first trip, and on my second trip, that I promised myself I was going to find my way down into the tunnels underneath the platform. So I took my shoes off, and I found one of the pits that looked like it was reasonably easy to climb down into. And I made my way along the culvert, because looking into another one of the pits nearby, I could visualize a shot that I wanted to get. Looking down from above into one of those pits, I could see that at the bottom of the pit, there were loads of ferns growing in the daylight. But if I could get into one of the tunnels and then take a shot looking back out of the tunnel into the open air pit, where there's lots of ferns, there would be a really good shot. So I basically had that shot in my mind, and I climbed down into the culvert, stooped, walked along one of the tunnels, and basically walked back to the pit to get that shot. And it kind of it came out looking pretty much how I imagined it was going to look in my mind's eye. I'm really pleased I got the shot. As I say, it won an award. However, while I was stoop walking along the tunnel, I noticed that the ceiling of the culvert was covered in shiny, very hard, shiny skinned black spiders. And I had no idea what they were. I just wanted to avoid them as best I could. And it was only after I'd taken that shot and I'd got home and I started doing a little bit more reading about it, I then found an article about a scientific article about it that said the culverts below the site harbour one of the UK's biggest populations of false widow spiders. basically it's the only venomous spider in the UK. Yeah, if I'd known that they were false widows before I'd gone in there to get the shot, I may not have got the shot. Villa Pacenti now. I think it's maybe the last location. No, two locations to go. Villa Pacenti. This clearly is not a villa. This is in an Italian town in northern Italy called I think is it Bergamo? Bergamo is very near Milan. Bergamo is on the side of the whole town of Bergamo is on a steep-sided valley, and the views across to the other side of the valley are quite spectacular. And on this basically this factory building, it's an old cement and stone factory building. It was the founding location for one of Italy's largest cement firms. Well, in fact, one of the world's largest cement firms. So this is the founding factory location for the firm Italcementi. And Italcementi was basically owned by the same family from its inception in the 1820s all the way up to 2016, when the company was sold to the German company Heidelberg Cement, which it was then absorbed into Heidelberg Cement. So this, as I say, was the founding location for the cement firm. And while we were here, we only knew about the cement factory and we were here to shoot it. And while we were here, some other photographers turned up and they said to us, you do realise that the house, the owner of the factory that set this factory up, his house is literally a couple of streets away, and that's amazing. It's a really spectacular villa, and that's abandoned as well. So we thanked them for their time, and after we'd shot the factory, we made our way a few streets away to the villa, and we made our way into the gardens, very overgrown gardens of the villa, and we found in the gardens there was this orangery, a really beautiful Art Nouveau orangery surrounded by thick undergrowth. And what we've got here in the corner of the orangery, we've got these lovely bespoke tiles that features all around the orangery, or the solarium. I'm not sure what, or maybe a winter garden they sometimes call them. Yeah, the tile work was amazing inside, but when the next shot is just, we were so chuffed that they told us about it. So happy that they told us where this place was, because the interior of this winter garden or solarium in the gardens was just something else. The amazing Art Nouveau windows in it, and all of these different tile friezes around. You've got swans up there, and all of the tiles all over the place featuring these bird motifs it's just stunningly beautiful. And you can see at some point there was a rockery in here as well. Over now into the main villa, bottom of the stairs on the left. The very top of the house, in a tower that stands up above the tiled roof, is this bizarre room, because the view from here across the valley would have been quite spectacular, but none of the windows opened and all of the windows were textured glass, so you couldn't actually see out. So it was a strange design choice, this. I had no idea what the purpose of this room was, but it was a little bit frustrating that we couldn't see the spectacular view from this room, because it was one of the higher rooms in the house. Top of the stairs landing, one of the upstairs room, very heavy decay. You can see the wallpaper is just sagging and falling off the walls there, and the carpet on the floor is just rotting away. And then downstairs, this room was, I say I never set shots up earlier. This is one of the only times I think I have moved something to create an effect. The chair was off to one side of the room and I moved it into the center for the shot. This particular room was so dark when I took this shot, I really could see next to nothing. And this is the power of the long exposure for you, really. The camera's on a tripod and it's about 1.5 minutes long exposure. And the camera revealed in details that I just couldn't see with the naked eye. Last location now, Welsh Bat is the second of the locations I added into the presentation for Llanelli Camera Club. You can see my entry point there, just there, the open window. You can see the other window here has got a board over it. So this, you can see the board there has been ripped and broken at the top there. So at some point, somebody's pulled the boards off and created the access point. It's about 3.5 hour drive from Reading, where I live. I'd wanted to do this for a long time, but it was such a long way. And I'd heard of other people driving a long way and then finding that window had been boarded up. So I just hadn't done it. I just didn't want to get there and waste the journey. But we were doing some camping in Hereford, which is only about an hour's drive away. It's on the border with Wales. And so I thought I would risk it. I got up early one morning and I did the 1 hour and 15 minute drive to Llanelli. And it was amazing. So this is, you can see that entry point just down there. This is the main chapel. if anyone is aware of some Welsh history, there was a real revival in Christianity in Wales around 1905. It was known as the Welsh Revival, and it saw lots of people going back to church, and it was fueled partly by the singing culture that was happening in churches at the time. It was a really proud tradition of the Welsh, where all the families would turn up, and these places would be absolutely booming with hymns and song. And when the Welsh Revival happened, churches went from being half full to being completely full again, and absolutely the noise, you can imagine the noise that was being made when all of these seats were filled with people and singing their hearts out. So just a few more shots from, that's the same shot but slightly closer in. That's up on that balcony we're looking at there, but looking sideways. But looking now back at the organ end of the chapel, and you can see some of the roof damage that's going on in there. When I was in here, it smelled quite heavily of pigeon poo, and all you really heard while you were in there were the flap of wings and the cooing of pigeons. Looking back towards the other end of the chapel from the upper balcony, and then on the left, looking back from the upper balcony at the organ area, and then again the exterior of the chapel. And really, that exterior shot always amazes me because it really doesn't look that big, yet when you're inside it feels a lot bigger. It's one of these sort of Doctor Who type TARDIS like buildings. The interior is always feels a lot bigger than the exterior looks. So anyway, I think that is the end of the presentation now. Thanks very much for listening. If you were interested, I do have a book out. It was brought out in 2016. It contains 24 different locations from a lot of, not all the same locations as these, some different ones as well. 24 locations and an introduction chapter as well that talks about urbex in general and gives little tips and advice. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. This is one very quick last story. This is a slope shaft that leads down underground from a clubhouse at a golf course. The club, if you follow golf at all, particularly things like the Ryder Cup, when the American golfers come over to the UK to play the Europeans sometimes, maybe you've heard of Wentworth Golf Course, because it's sometimes used for things like major tournaments. But anyway, you can imagine government ministers during the Cold War, when we possibly might get attacked by Russian atomic weapons. You can imagine government ministers saying, well, what happens if they attack and we're playing golf? So they had to have a fallout shelter built underneath the clubhouse. So this is a slope shaft that leads down underneath the golf course into a small series of rooms where they could have taken shelter. So anyway, that is the end of the presentation now. Thank you very much, everyone, for turning up and listening to me. And if we've got any questions, we could do those now.
Excellent. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but there's definitely a lot of feedback that this was great. They loved every bit of it. So we appreciate it. So let me jump to some of the questions that I saw. And so one of the questions was, can you explain the type or focal length f-stop lenses you prefer to use for this type of photography? Mainly the wide angle shots in cave, factories, and manor houses.
Yeah, because not always, like you might be in a steelworks, and the interiors of steelworks are vast. So it really does depend on the location, but a lot of the time, a lot of the locations I've shot, the interior spaces are often not like steelworks. They're often a lot smaller. So you do find yourself using the wider focal lengths more than the longer lens shots. So I tend to use, my most used lens is my 24-70. I've got a 15-30, I've got a 24-70, I've got a 70-200, and I've got a 150-450. I hardly ever use the 150-450. Although the locations call for you to use certain focal lengths more than others, my favorite lens actually is my 70-200. I just really love the compression of layers you get with a longer lens, and I try and use that longer lens wherever I can. And even in relatively small places, maybe there's some close-ups I can do with that lens. I just really love the 70-200. But yeah, my most used is the 24-70.
Okay. Another question. Do you only use available lighting, or have you brought a flash at all? Or
So
use
most of the
a
shots are
flashlight?
available. Yeah, so most of the shots are available, like ambient natural light. But like, for example, when I go into the underground reservoirs or tunnels, there isn't any light. You have to bring. So in those cases, I use my. I've got it here. Oh, here it is. So I've got this here. It's one of my old caving helmet lights. So you've got the battery pack there with a wire that connects it to that, and then so it's a pretty bright light, and I use those in dark spaces. It's got a wide setting, so it throws. So when I go into, and that's some of my favourite photography actually, because when you've got a very dark space, when you're outdoors or your light's coming in windows, the light is where it is. You have to work with the light how it is. But if you've got a very dark environment and you're adding your own light, it's more of a creative process. You can choose the angle of the light, how long you light something for, where you don't light to leave something in shadow. So it's almost like it's a little bit closer to traditional art when you're lighting, because you choose how the image is going to look depending upon where you place the light. So it's a bit more creative, and I really enjoy that side of it. So I do quite a bit of light painting actually. I really enjoy it.
Are you worried about any of the animals, bugs, or critters when you are going out on these adventures? Before you look it up, I guess.
Yeah, as I say, I've told you a couple of the stories of mostly spiders, really, to be honest with you. But we don't have an awful lot in the UK. I know you've got things like the brown recluse in the United States that is a particularly nasty bite, but in the UK, there's not that much that you need to be too worried about. I don't love spiders, full stop, but yeah, I think if I'm traveling and I'm going to other countries, then I'm a bit more aware that there could be snakes or there could be spiders. So yeah, I think when I'm abroad, I went to Sweden once, to a forested area, to shoot a scrapyard, an old classic car scrapyard in Sweden, and it's located in a really remote location out in the middle of nowhere, in the wilderness basically. And I was aware that there were potentially could be bears there, so that was a little bit scary, but I didn't see any bears. But yeah.
So do you take any special equipment like, what is it, bear spray or
I wouldn't know.
waders or anything
I
like
wouldn't
that?
even know where to buy bear spray in the UK. I'm not even sure you could. But you'd probably have to order it in from the States.
I see one that just popped up. Have you ever gone into trouble with the law after posting your pictures of places you shouldn't have been? Ooh.
Not after posting. I had. So, for example, the images in this set from the underwater ballroom, the underwater dome place I went to. I was contacted by the owner after I'd posted my pictures, who said, "We have all sorts of people coming here, and we have people that will come here and will cause damage. And I really would rather nobody came." He was the owner of the whole estate, basically. And he said, "I can tell from the way you've written about it on your social media and your pictures that you care about what you do, but do you mind removing them? Because your pictures are just going to encourage more and more people to come." So I've been contacted by people once I've posted. The only time I've been arrested 4 times by the police, twice in the UK and twice in Europe. The only time it felt serious was one of the UK ones. I was at, actually it was an American air base. It was a place called Greenham Common. So there was an American air base not near Newbury, not far from where I live. And it had cruise missiles. So it was one of the places in the UK that American nuclear weapons were being stored in big bunkers. And the Americans left the airbase in the late 1980s after a massive peace protest. There were lots of people encamped around the outside of the fence line protesting about nuclear weapons being here in the UK. And eventually the American forces left the base, and it sat like that, not being used for a long time. But a few years ago, I climbed over the fences to go in at night. And generally there's nobody there. It's a completely abandoned old, and it's basically the bunkers where the nuclear weapons were being stored. and I went to shoot the bunkers at night. I was going to light them up, and I just happened to pick the wrong day to go, because the guy that caught me in there, he said, apart from about 4 or 5 days a year, it is completely empty, but you're unlucky, because if you'd been here about 4 hours ago, there were around 300 soldiers there, and they were using the interior for military training. So yeah, I was arrested because he said to me, look, normally it would be civil trespass, but because we were using it today for military training up until midnight, I have a feeling that you've just trespassed on military property, which is a criminal offence. So the police arrested me, took me to the police station. They interviewed me for about 2 hours, and then they said, you're free to go, no charges. So I got away with it.
And you were able to keep those pictures?
I didn't get any pictures,
Oh, you didn't get any?
unfortunately. What I do when I first turn up at a location, I always walk around. I walk around the whole location before I get my camera out. And while I was walking around and scoping out the location and working out where my first shot was going to be, I saw a flash of light in the distance, and it was somebody's either mobile phone or a small torch. And it looked as though it was within the fence line, so there was somebody in there with me. And I got scared immediately, and I phoned my friend up and said, look, there's somebody in here with me. And he said, no, you're scaring yourself. There's nobody in there, because he'd already been there the previous weekend, and it was his photographs that made me want to go. And he said, look, just stay, there's nobody there. He said, it's probably a car turning around outside the fence. And I said, no, that was definitely inside with me. And I went to leave, and then he caught me as I was about to leave. But yeah, it was pretty scary, but yeah, I got away with it. No charges. But the scary thing was, while he was holding me in his torchlight, he told me to get on the floor. Police cars he'd opened the gates while I was walking around, and police cars started coming in. There was loads of police there. And I said, look, this is ridiculous. It's just me here. Why do you need like 12 police officers? And then while we were talking, a police helicopter came over with a searchlight. And I said to them, I'm not going to be charged for this, am I? I can imagine paying thousands of pounds for a police helicopter. And they said, no, don't worry, you're all right. You're not going to get charged for it. So anyway, it worked out.
That was a great story, which leads me to 2 questions I'm going to combine. They want to know, how does your family feel about you, going on these photography trips and this hobby, which seems more like a job than a hobby? And are your sons interested in photography as well?
So how did my family feel? When I first started doing it, it became became an obsession, to be honest with you. I was utterly obsessed by doing it, and I would do it as often as I possibly could. And I think my other half, she tolerated it for a while, and then started to say, look, you're doing this a lot. I mean, maybe you should just tone it down a bit. And just around the point that she started to get a bit fed up with how often I was doing it, I think I won my first award. And off the back of that, I started getting offers for some work. And the moment I first started getting paid, she was suddenly a lot keener. She was like, well, that's fine. If you're going to earn money from doing it, carry on. So it all sort of happened just at the right time, really. And then obviously I've won a few more awards since then. And with each award, you tend to get a bit more interest. And these days, I've got a second presentation, by the way, if you wanted to see the second part. The second part is a lot more permission, is less urbex and more permission stuff. Because what's happened in the last few years is my name's got out there a bit more, and I'm now doing a lot more work for organisations who happen to own heritage locations, going in and documenting places. And I'm doing work with a lot of the UK's major heritage organisations like the National Trust, English Heritage, and Heritage Open Days. So three heritage charities, I'm working with them now. And I think if I was to do a lot of trespass, and I was publishing stuff on social media, particularly the National Trust, and they got wind of the fact that I was blatantly trespassing on private property, I might not get any more work with them. So these days, my kind of focus has changed from urbex to more permission. But with regards to my 2 sons, my oldest son isn't particularly interested in it, but my youngest, he doesn't like photography. He doesn't really take pictures, but he's really into being with me and going. So he's been to maybe 5 or 6 locations now. And that underground area, those mines that you saw with the hole in the roof at the top, there's one of the shots in the shots I showed you in which there's a little figure by me, and that was my youngest son. He was 5 in that shot. He's now 13. So that was 8 years ago. But yeah, he's been with me through a few different places. He loves it.
Wow. So are you making a living with this now?
So yeah, it's only sort of like a side hustle thing, really. I have a job working for a big Canadian toy company. So I work for Spin Master, who are the toy company that produced Paw Patrol, those little pup things. And so yeah, so I'm a graphic designer for a toy company, and I do bits of work here and there. So it's not I couldn't give up my toy company job, but it just provides a bit of. I don't really do it to earn big money. I do it because I love doing it, and if I can get paid. A lot of the time I do, if somebody offers me work, but it's on a voluntary basis, I still do it because I just enjoy doing it. So it's not really about the money. It's just if I can get paid to do something I love doing, then that's a bonus.
Excellent. Another question is, have you photographed in the US yet? And if not, are you interested in doing so?
Yeah, I have a whole list. When you're doing this, you build sometimes you write stuff down. I've got some documents with stuff, but in my head, I've got a whole list of locations all around the world of places that. So I've forgotten the guy's name. There was a guy who lives in, I think it's Texas. He lives, and he does similar stuff to me. He's not Matthew Christopher. He's somebody else, and he has photographed inside. It's a little project of his. He's photographed inside. So back in the 1950s. The US's nuclear deterrent was basically the Titan I ICBMs. So all over, well, not all over, but in various states in America, there were subterranean launch sites. You know, the sort of nuclear missile launch sites where the doors would open and then a ballistic missile would come out of the doors in the ground. So Titan I launch sites there's some in Kansas, there's some in Colorado. Some of them you can't get into because they're flooded. They're underground and they've completely flooded. But certain ones haven't been flooded. But to go into them is quite an undertaking because they're full of asbestos. They're full of dangerous chemicals from the fuel for the booster rockets. A lot of the dangerous chemicals that were in there when it was in use have just rotted out of containers now and are filling parts of the site. So, and it's an enclosed space. So if you go in, you have to go in wearing a fully enclosed oxygen breathing supply with your own like oxygen tanks on it. So to go into them is a pretty risky affair. But the pictures this guy got, you have to take lights in. They're pitch black. But the shots he got in there, like it really fired my imagination. I thought, well, if I ever end up going, I'm going to get in touch with that guy, and we're going to go and shoot inside some of these launch sites. But yeah, there's a whole load of places. Some of the ghost towns in America I'd like to go and shoot. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so much there. There's so much in America that would be awesome to shoot, and it's quite different from what's in Europe as well. Yeah, in the UK it's different again, and then you go to Europe and it's very different, but America's different again. So it's just something I've not experienced yet. So I think I'll probably be in touch with a band in America and get him to take me to a few places.
Okay. I know you've gone out, you said you go out sometimes by yourself or with a couple other people, but how big of a party do you normally go out to shoot with?
So the most we've ever gone away to Europe with was 4 people. Occasionally, very rarely I'm on my own, but not very often. It's not the safest thing to do. You don't want to fall through the floor in a location and be on your own. You're going to die potentially. But there's usually 2 of us, sometimes 3, but I think 2 is the optimum number. If you've got a big group of people trekking across land towards an abandoned property, chances are somebody's going to spot this big group of people. If there's 2 of you, you can move quite quietly and quite silently, and there's very little impact, and people just don't know you're there, particularly if you're being careful. And we've been in locations in the UK before, and it's just been me and one other person, and then we've got there for first light. We've got there at 5 in the morning, and then 9 o'clock, a massive group of photographers turns up. And nobody's been quiet. Everyone's shouting, "Have you got so-and-so lens you could pass through to me?" and calling to each other from room to room. And the moment that starts happening, we packed up and leave because you're going to get caught. So yes, being nice and quiet and being stealthy is the name of the game, really. The fewer people, the better.
Okay. I try to pull it out. So another question was about the research that you do.
Yep.
You said some places have plaques, but do you do research before you go or after you've been there? How do you find out information about these different locations?
I try and do a bit of research before I go. So say I'm driving somewhere for the day and I've got 3 locations planned. I will do a little bit of research beforehand. It's always good if you're going somewhere that it's a factory building of some sort that produce some product, do a bit of reading on it. And then when you're there, maybe you can recognize a machine or what that bit of equipment did. It's always good to know what you're looking at. But it depends on the site, really. That jet engine place was so interesting and so amazing to me that every time I did the 11 trips I did, every time I went into a new building there, I was reading all about it online. There was loads of resource available on the internet about it, and I just read and read and read and read and read. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the time you do a little bit of research beforehand, and if the location is super interesting, you end up reading loads about it afterwards. But yeah, and if you're going to post on social media, that's a really important part of it, because it's always good. There's lots of people shooting this kind of thing and posting online, but very often people don't provide information. They'll just say so-and-so building, and that'll be it. That'll be what the caption says. And I think it's always really good if you've got an audience on social media. It's always good to be able to accurately inform them by telling them what they're looking at. It just makes your social media posts a bit more interesting if there's some context, you know.
Absolutely. You're getting a lot of kudos in chat. And while you're talking, I'm trying to drop all your links in there so people can follow you and follow up afterwards.
Yeah, so it's Forgotten Heritage, basically. So I've got an Instagram page for Forgotten Heritage. I've got a Twitter page. I've got a Facebook page. And I've got an ELLO, which I really like as well. It's not a very popular social media, but I really like that one.
So I will tell the club, I will send out an email with the links in, because some of them are not transferring well into chat, other than the regular websites, but I'm dropping the rest of them in there.
Okay.
I think I grabbed all the questions out. Does anybody want to come off mute and ask another question, or let me know if I missed one of your questions?
Nope.
Oh, it looks quiet. Going once. Matt, can you unmute them? I see a hand up, a thumbs up.
I don't know how to do that.
I'm trying to figure out. Oh, no. Oh, John said I asked this question. So, okay, I got those. All right. Anyone wants to come off mute? Going once, going twice. Sold.
Cool.
All right. Matt, thank you very much. You did an excellent job. It was really great. We loved all the background and the images and all the tips and tricks that you shared with us. Debbie, would you like to come on and close us out?
Can I just say something quickly?
Absolutely.
If you wanted me back, I do have a second presentation. So if you want me to come back at some point and do this part 2, I can.
Okay. So I'm going to say we're already booked for 2022, but if anybody cancels, we'll let you know, but I'll definitely put you down for 2023.
Brilliant. Great. It's been
Matt,
fun.
thank you so very, very much on behalf of our club and on all the other guests that we had today. And Valerie, thank you very much for bringing Matt to us. Matt, I have to say that we almost always have people drop off the call at some point, but for over 2 hours, you maintained every single person who started on the call. It was still on the call. So we've lost a couple since questions started, but boy, for the whole part of your presentation, we did not lose a person. So I think that says a lot about your presentation style and your material and how your beautiful images. So thank you very, very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Have a good night. Get some rest.
Good night.
Thank
It's a little late.
Night,
Thank-
everyone.
Bye.
Alexandra, it was nice to meet you as well.
Get
Oh,
some.
thank
sleep. It's almost
thank you
midnight.
so much. Thank you so much. Really, thank you.